morning, Joe Paul.
Good morning. How you doing? Oh, county council.
What's going on?
Hello. Good morning.
Barbara. Betsy's on Zoom also. Yeah. So it's 9:01 a.m. We call the meeting to order. Can I get the Pledge of Allegiance from Supervisor Kosmicki? Ready. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I get an acknowledgement, a certificate of posting?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0. So now we move on to the budget hearing. So I will pass it off to my CAO to introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to thank everybody for their attendance. I want to thank staff, all their accountants, the auditor's department, budget office, as well as the board for all the work we've done over the last 6 to 7 months. It's been a lot of work. We're finally here. And what I wanted to share with the board is you do have before you a budget, a balanced budget with many considerations. There's been many different things that we've had to deal with. The financial revenues coming in, we've expressed some of our concerns with that, as well as some of the inflation challenges that we have before us today. So this budget does reflect it, as well as reflecting some of the work that we've done during the budget meetings, special meetings we've had concerning additional staff in some key areas, 2 sheriff deputies, RMA staff, there'd be a staff analyst and a capital projects manager, along with some other individuals that are outside of the general fund. So there's some staff there to address our needs with roads, parks, and other things that we need to address, safety. But one of the key things that I wanted to highlight in this budget that you have before you is really tackling some of our infrastructure, using one-time money, one-time reserves. And in this budget, we're really putting a lot of emphasis in that for this next year, as well as addressing other things, other facets, the culture of our county. Your board has put an emphasis on that. And so this next year, we'll be pressing and moving forward with that. What I wanted to share with you briefly, Gabriel is going to highlight more of this, but I just wanted to share with you item C on the agenda. Historically, in years past, we've had to work beyond today. I don't foresee that. We probably will be done, hopefully, in 3 to 4 hours. We should be done today. But with that being said, we do have that allocated within item C of our agenda. And then before you, Mr. Chair, since this is new for you and some of your board members, we'll be moving forward with requesting that your board moves forward with approving temporary due pass on consent and regular agenda items. So that's something that's unique, a little bit different than normal meetings. So with that, I think it's a pretty solid budget. We need more revenue. I think we've highlighted that on many occasions. So again, that's something that we're also going to strive for with commercial and business development. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and, Mr. Chair, if I may, pass it to Gabriel. He'll be handling item E.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Board of Supervisors. I really appreciate the time that you, as well as all the department heads and all the fiscal staff, have taken throughout this budget process, and then today as well, to be able to be here either in person or online to answer if there's any questions, and I really do appreciate them taking some time. So as our CEO, Ray Espinosa, mentioned, what we're looking is an increase from last year. Majority of the increases revolving around capital projects, road infrastructure, an injection of funding essentially from the general fund to capital project fund or the road fund. And the majority of this, keyed in through one-time money, whether if it's money that we had on hand or money that's coming in, for example, American Rescue Plan Act funding. That's the majority of what we keyed in to do this fiscal year. As we kind of went through prior budget meetings, we highlighted the idea that we do have limited revenue, especially on the general fund side, and that's been one of the key drivers behind why we really took a deep dive at the positions and why we wanted to really hash out what we could add on, and that's why ultimately we only added on just a handful of positions and not everything that was requested by all the departments. And I'm thankful from all the departments and their consideration, knowing that we do see that there's a need, and we are trying to combat that by different avenues, whether that's finding new sources of revenue or trying to do a sales tax increase, or working with businesses to make sure that our business and industry drives home and continues to grow here in San Benito County. So with that, I'm going to start off here a presentation. I'm going to do a highlight essentially of the budget, and then just talk briefly about what we're going to be doing here during this budget hearing. So starting off here, our budget hearings governed essentially Government Code 29062, 29063. We have to present and submit the recommended budget to the board prior to June 30th, which we have done. And before that time, we need to have meetings where any official or member of the public can come and voice concerns about a specific, budget unit or a department regarding, a program or anything that they want to implement. Further on from there, Government Code 29080 and 290 through 29093 essentially gives the breakdown of how a budget hearing will take place. It's essentially a public forum where it's open to the public and departments, and anyone can come in and talk about through communication to the clerk of the board, request to talk about a specific budget unit or a department. And essentially beyond that, after the board hears the budget and everything is accounted for and approved, amended, or redacted, the board then directs the county administration office and the county auditor to make any final adjustments based off the findings through the budget hearings or recommendations that are finalized in the budget hearings. So what are we approving essentially during the budget hearings? What we're approving is the recommended budget as a spending authority. What we're approving is either new or reclassified positions through the personnel schedule. We're also approving flexibly staffed positions. And one of the main drivers behind the flexibly staffed position is either addressing retention or succession planning, trying to make sure that we're really driving home at some of these key areas that the board has been touching on throughout either through the budget process or at different various meetings that we've had throughout the year. We're also approving the fixed asset schedule, approving any, if it's a vehicle purchase or any essential system that we're purchasing for the county. That's one of the items that is on here for approval. We're approving capital projects, both facilities and roads. Facility infrastructure, for example, the work that's going to be done here at the board chamber and a couple of our other facilities. as well as then the road infrastructure items, so some of the improvements that are going to be done to the local roads here in our community. The other item that is approved during this time is our operating budgets for all departments, CSAs and CFDs. What these are actually are Schedules 9 and 15. Schedule 9 is for government funds. Schedule 15 is for CSAs and CFDs districts or the service areas. The schedules actually come from the final adopted budget, but in our situation right now for the budget hearing, what we're going to be approving is essentially those expenditures to move forward. The County Budget Act schedules, as you see in here, we go from 1 to 15. As I mentioned, we're only going to be approving 9 and 15. So 9 is financing sources and uses by budget unit for government funds, and 15 special districts and other agencies, essentially. And those are the ones that are going to be approved. The remainder of the schedules will come back to the board in the form of an adopted budget. And the reason why we're only approving 9 and 15 is because right now we're still working our way through the end of the fiscal year. We actually end in a couple of days on June 30th. So even by the time that ends and a couple of weeks pass by, there's still finalizing costs with the county auditor's office as departments begin to finish out all their expenses. Everything needs to be settled in and completed. That's why we take a two-step process. First, we move forward with our recommended budget as approved as suspending authority, and then we come back with the adopted budget as after we have more finalized numbers at the end of the year. And then ultimately, the final budget that is completed is then submitted to the state controller on December 1st. So it takes a couple of steps, but after everything is finalized, the county auditor's office closes books. They're able to complete their annual comprehensive financial report, and everything gets finalized. That then gets submitted up to the state. So this is an example from our county budget guide, Schedules 9 and 15, of what they look like, essentially covering a revenue section where we have what's coming in. We have a couple years on there that look at historical data. We also have on there a recommended section, and then we have an adopted piece by the Board of Supervisors that is moving forward with as spending authority moving forward, pending any changes that do happen during this budget meeting. It also breaks down on the left side, essentially our salaries and benefits, services and supplies, any fixed assets or capital infrastructure transfers out. So this is an example of what it looks like from the county budget guide. And this is an example of our own software on how it looks like on our OpenGov system. Essentially similar. What I have on here is a couple of prior year expenses with 2019-2020 actuals, 2021 actuals, 21-22 CAO recommended budget, 22-23 department requests. So this is what was requested by the different departments to the county administration office. And then ultimately 22-23, if there were any recommendations brought either through the budget process or by the county administration office, that was a recommendation to either, increase expenses on one side or decrease somewhere else, or if there was any changes to personnel, this is essentially through the CAO's office where it would be recommended. So here, this works as a good guide to be able to see and track expenses as they fluctuate from year to year. For example, on this one, which is our internal services or our human resources department, 2019-2020, tracking along our expense side was about $800,000. 2021 dropped down to $685,000. And then the CAO's office last year, we recommended $706,000. At the end of this year, we'll know where that stands in a couple of months. And then this year, what we're recommending is $822,000 moving forward from last year to this year. Essentially, staffing costs as positions are filled, or if there's any changes. For example, in this internal service one, what we had before was a position that was previously split between the county administration office and human resources, our deputy CEO at the time. But now that we've brought on just the full-fledged human resource staff, the position is not fully vetted to just charge out of internal services. So things like that, moving from one to another. On our side, they're more administration type changes. So that's why in this situation, you'll see, the salaries and benefits piece did, have a jump from one to another. So,
Mr. Chair, can I jump in here real quick? I don't know if you're aware of this, but on the links that are available to us in the public under the budget hearings presentation, it's coming up not available. And it's been like that for several days. I should have brought this up earlier. And also, same thing for the general fund reserve policy link. So it would be nice if we could follow along on our screen, but we can't do that right
Gabriel, just go directly to the actual unit
now.
itself.
I'm also saying that for the public because the public can't access those.
Yeah,
Ultimately,
I would echo that too.
those-
Yes.
ultimately, what he's doing is he's presenting that like we would a normal staff
No,
report.
I know.
So if there's,
I understand.
that's from the PowerPoint itself.
But I think from a public standpoint,
yeah,
ideally, so something's wrong there with those two links.
which one?
It looks like it's
reserve?
just item E.
It's budget hearings presentation link and general fund reserve policy link, those two. And they weren't available anytime, as far as I know, over the weekend and still not available. But anyway, it's hard to see this on the screen fully, so it would be nice if we could, I don't know if there's anything you can do
It's on the
to
Granicus side.
get that fixed. Anyway,
Okay.
sorry for the interruption.
Thank you.
Would you like us to make some copies to have for the members here available, and then
At least to see the numbers that we're going to be.
Yeah, that would be
Looking at-
helpful.
yes.
we can get those.
Thank you.
I think on our side, it's something to do because everything else is linked, as the supervisor mentioned. Everything else is linked to our OpenGov software. Those two are actually linked to our Granicus essentially website, where they're stored as documents, and they're not popping up at the time. I do have them here saved, but just on a flash drive, and I think we're working on getting those set up.
Okay, but yeah, I think it's a good point of clarification what Supervisor Tiffany had mentioned. Maybe it'd be good to even do an attachment through our Facebook link for folks from the public that are paying attention, just for the sake of clarity.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
I am having difficulties as well opening links to the budget. I've sent an email to the auditor's office to see if they could help.
Was that Barbara?
Yes.
Barbara, do you mind covering which one you're having an issues with?
I'm having difficulties with everything, actually. And I don't know whether it's user error on my part, but I can't get into any of the individual budget units. I was just about to log out because I'm logged in as a member of the county. I was about to log out and log back in just as a public member to show if it's comes out better. I didn't mean to distract the board. I'll figure it out.
Corrected as well because I can't find anything either. I needed
Mr. Chair,
help.
could we take a 5-minute recess and then look
Yeah.
at this, please? Thanks.
5-minute break, please. Starting at 9:20, we'll be back at 9:25. Thank you.
Yeah, because for transparency's sake, it's not transparent at all. No, I was struggling myself over here, so I kept having Vanessa.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think, yeah. That should be good. And then all the other links are good, right? Yeah, they're both on there. Mhm. And Ray's just like, can you just go off the county website? So I'll just take them.
We're couple of minutes past, so we should be
I
wrapping
think
it up.
we're just waiting for Ray, and I think we're good.
We ready, Ray?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good?
9:27, we're back. So what was the solution, Gabe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the solution, there was 2 broken links at the time. So what we've been able to do for anyone that's, following from home or anyone here that has a device, if you go to our county website, the first link at the top is the budget. So it's essentially what we're going to be covering over. But the 2 missing links, if you go down to the events, special meeting, budget hearing, the 2 broken links have now just been linked up here as individuals. So the presentation is right here. And Exhibit E, the general fund reserve policy, it's right here as well.
Perfect.
So
Thank
those
you.
2 are now linked up. And then
And for the, for clarity, I think it was the Nova system that was the issue. So any of the department heads that may be logged in to the system on the back end, that could be an issue. So preferably to go right here, click on this agenda, and at that point, you can click on the links there and they're active.
yeah, besides the first link, the presentation, and the Exhibit E, but those we've now just.
Now you, yeah,
Mhm.
manually. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Transparency is what we strive for, so if there's anything that we can do to
Good job.
make sure that we're addressing that, that's what we look for. Awesome. So with trying to move forward here, covering schedules 9 and 15, going to do an overview of the entire budget. What we have recommended is essentially $234 million, represents an increase of 51.5 from last year's adopted budget. The majority of those expenses are through capital projects, so an increase of about 18.8 million. Road improvement projects, 12.2 million. So between those 2, out of the 51.5 million increase from the prior year, $30 million of it are one-time one-time increases through facility improvements or capital improvements. One of the things that we are highlighting is that our disaster recovery division, which we used for the American Rescue Plan Act, has more or less returned back to normal. Right now, we're not foreseeing any big increases from the federal or the state government for essentially COVID issues or any disaster unless something were to happen. So it's more or less returned. What we're looking to do, not just within the general fund, but some of the impact fee funds and some of the subvention funds and the general fund, is look at various one-time expenses for one-time funding for one-time expenses. That's what we're looking to do. So essentially, what the recommended budget is showing from last adopted budget is we're increasing 29 positions from the adopted budget, not from where we stood right now. Some of the 29 positions were changes that were made mid-year. For example, when we brought on the custodian positions in the middle of the year, some of the positions that were funded by AB 109 through CCP money, CCP, AB 109 money, last year. So majority of these positions have already were already approved at some point throughout the year. So there were more of a mid-year ads instead of new ads. Any true positions that were being added this year are on the general fund side, adding essentially 4 positions, 1 position unfunded, and then a couple of positions that are added pending any special process. For example, some CSA positions through a 218 voter process that needs to take place. So that's essentially the main hit. There were also other positions that were added through the year that were funded through some sort of funding source. For example, American Rescue Act Plan funding that came by, and we're able to fund essentially our PRA positions for our county council. So 2 positions there, and for our county information, public information officer as well, funded through ARPA money. So those are more or less the bigger positions that were added through the budget hearing, through the budget meetings. A couple of positions that were added for our Health and Human Services Department, essentially round up the bigger changes. There was throughout the year, there were various changes through specific funding that was awarded to the Health and Human Services Department, and those we brought in mid-year as adjustments. And ultimately now everything is getting cleaned up. So that's why you're seeing a larger increase from the last adopted budget to now what we're recommending here.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Gabe, so just big picture here. I know we've talked about over the last couple of years, year and a half, about, thank you, about having the open positions being more reflective of reality,
Right.
tightening things up as far as, if there's open positions that are not likely going to get filled. With that being said, and what you just said, with this budget, is it correct to say we have less flexibility in that we don't have these open positions that, we always have that, in the past, we had that room. We had that room during the, during COVID. So I'm just curious, big picture, how does personnel work in
Yes.
regards to that?
So big picture, I know one of the things that we wanted to do was not constrain some of the higher priority departments, for example, our safety staff and our public works staff, to make sure that we're able to move forward with those. For the general fund overall, we've been pretty decently staffed. Subvention funds are typically the ones that have had a little bit more issue with turnover. And what we have addressed from last year and kind of been carrying it on through this year is, as you mentioned, making some positions be it a little bit more hard to, or I guess hard to recruit for, because we've unfunded them. So one of the items that you'll see change from last year to this year is we have an unfunded tally from essentially on our schedule of personnel, and that has increased from last year to this year. Do I have it on here? Let me see if I can pop it up, or unless I have it in one of my slides. Oh, there you go. Getting a little bit ahead, but in the general fund, we have a total of essentially 12 unfunded positions. From 8 the prior year. So what we've done essentially from year to year is we've taken positions that have historically been unfilled, and we've seen a pattern of essentially the position just being there without doing anything with it. We've essentially unfunded it. All those reflect and are shown on the schedule of positions. And what we're doing essentially going forward is monitoring positions and departments to see if there are positions that aren't being filled for one reason or another. Then if it's not being filled, then obviously the need isn't really there. Or if there is a need there, but there's a larger issue larger issue. For example, you know, there's an issue with the salary or maybe issue with the position itself, then now we have our HR manager who now we're able to tackle that issue and be able to address it, either to make the position more competitive or whatever that may be. But
So in short, the answer is yes. We have unfunded those positions that your board had asked us to unfund. There are still some that we do have funded per the board, per the discussion when we had with the board, i.e. the safety. There was some positions that were open. Obviously, you added more positions, so that is one. We will discuss that in a little bit when we get there. We can delve into that budget unit because that's on the regular agenda.
Yeah.
Well, and my larger question is as we are looking forward with the possibility of a recession potentially, hopefully not, and if that were to happen, how that may or may not affect our revenue. I mean, I know with property tax, we're maybe a little less vulnerable than other counties. But anyway, with that as a background, I just want to be sure we're well protected, whether it be through the reserves that we have or, you know, just with this budget. So that's just a larger question why I'm asking that question.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And I was going to say, just as it pertains to flexibility with our staffing levels, we have less because we eliminated the vacancy budgeting per the will of the board. So there's, you know, there was basically we're going to be pretty locked in with staffing. It sounds like, and I'm not trying to speak out of turn, but that as needs come up, you know, I guess then it would be at the discretion of the board. But in general, we're pretty locked in with staffing.
And just to consider, you know, obviously if things, we have to address it at that time. There's always a fluctuation of staff. We're going, you know, there's ups and downs with that. So we'd probably immediately have to put a freeze on even the positions that we do have funded in order to address maybe a fiscal downturn if we have to. So that's, you know, how we would address it. I think this budget's pretty lean. We haven't done a really big increase, but I know that there's still, you know, we did add some more positions. So it's something your board's going to have to, you know, your board gave us authorization to move forward with, but we're here today to get that passed. So ultimately, that's your decision. So with that, Gabriel, we'll have you keep moving forward unless there's any other questions.
yeah, so moving forward here, these are essentially overview of the entire budget. 185 million in revenues, 234 million in expenses. Deficit essentially being made by one-time expenditures. So as I mentioned from the prior slide to this slide, large increase in on the expense side, more or less related to one-time projects, one-time expenses that we're funding either with our unassigned fund balance or one-time revenues that have come in. Trying to, you know, take a big chunk at, you know, fixing some of our either road infrastructure or facilities, but definitely being mindful that if we are tackling some of these items, it is more of a one-time. And as Supervisor Tiffany mentioned, monitoring the situation to see, you know, what we can do with the resources that we have on hand. And I think this year, with you know, moving forward with establishing a reserve policy and establishing a reserve fund, that will, you know, go a long ways into making sure that if we do have a downturn in the market, that we have funds set aside so we can continue to move, you know, operations within the general fund.
And Gabe, I know we've talked about this before, but when you look at, you see revenues less expenses, it, you know, pops out
Right.
this, what would appear to be a large deficit.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's really misleading because
Right.
we have these one-time funds that are coming in to offset that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also gather that since they're one-time funds,
Right.
the next year's budget will likely see a drop-off
Oh, yeah.
in terms of expenses because we won't have those one-time funds.
Yeah.
Correct?
And that was something that actually happened from the 2021 year to the 21-22 year. 2021, we had two large projects, the jail expansion and the behavioral health building. And from that year to the 21-22 year, we had seen a drop off in the budgets based off those capital projects. And then moving forward, we should be taking, these new projects either off, or if they're not completed, or if the board has other thoughts throughout the year to better utilize funding in one area or another, or if, we do have a very severe downturn in the market, then we come back to the board and figure out steps to address and try to mitigate, make sure that we can be operationally sound from moving forward. If we have to look at potentially freezing positions, so we, freeze hiring on that side, or we, look to maybe not do a lot of capital infrastructure besides essentially critical infrastructure upgrades, or maybe we decrease the amount of influx from the general fund to the road fund for projects. So that's something that we can look at and monitor as we kind of progress. And ultimately, we'll come back. As I mentioned, I typically do quarterly updates to the board for the budget, and I think those would be key areas where we can take a look and see how we're going, how we're progressing. If it's starting to look like the market's taking a sharper turn one direction than we thought, then that's where we can come and address some of these things. Or it could go the other way. If potentially we do see something better, then we can come to the board and say, hey, we can maybe take out a larger chunk of road projects at the time if we wanted to do. And one of the things from that this, as Supervisor mentioned, that this doesn't really do justice, is that we are using one-time funds from that we've had on hand. It's something that our OpenGov system wasn't able to do, but will in the next year. So that's something that we'll be able to bring back to make sure that we can, make sure that these numbers don't look as scary.
Yeah,
some
and that's
situations.
something I've asked Gabriel to work on, because that's really important. I think painting the picture with our operational cost and where we stand operationally, and then having the actual projects, the one-time money, kind of in a separate view when you're looking at the budget, because it's the way it is currently. It's kind of melded together, and it's very difficult to look at and read. So.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up, so I'm more interested in I'm glad you brought that up, just operationally, whether, do we have a structural deficit or not operationally? That's ultimately that's the main question. And is there a way of
Can you clarify that question?
just personnel, everyday expenses, supplies, taking out the capital?
If you were to take out the capital expenses, essentially what we would be shooting off of is, it really depends on whether you have expenses materialized on the services and supply side. That's usually the big driver. If for example, we've been shooting off average, we're going to be essentially either flat, so we're covering all of our expenses by our revenue that's coming in. That's why, for example, this year, when we were wanting to add positions, I had mentioned essentially the level that that I felt comfortable adding, just so we were essentially keeping up our revenues with our expenditures. That's why I had provided the board essentially with a $400,000, ceiling if we wanted to make sure that we were, on par. If we had exceeded that, then that's where I would have been more nervous of, okay, we're going to just continue to, we were going to dig into our unassigned fund balance and just keep eating that up, or we're going to need to find some other source of funding to continue to supplement us.
So is it a yes
So,
or a no?
yeah, the answer is yes. Gabriel loves to elaborate. The short answer is yes. I've talked to Gabriel time and time again about this, and that's one of the things he had to really sharpen his pencil with this year is to cut,
Right.
Whether it's services and supplies and other areas, to make sure we balance operationally.
But we're not necessarily putting additional money into the reserve, which is
No.
also a policy generally.
That's right. Yeah.
We've had in the past. So
And
that's what the
typically it would automatically occur because of the vacancy budgeting. Typically our forecasting on vacancies where we usually budgeted 10 to 15%, and they would come in at 20% or 25%. At that point, that's where that extra money would actually then go into our reserves.
great.
Typically, that's what would happen. So, but again, just keep in mind, we've said it time and time again, our assessed value and the amount of money we make is not keeping up with the expenditure cost, the cost of doing business.
And the costs are going to keep
The
going.
cost-
We know the projections.
So the
are
following year and the
going
years, exactly, that's
Well,
where,
and that ties to our fluidity, right, and our credit rating. So if we don't have that fluidity, it can impact our credit rating, which makes it hard for us to do anything if we want to have projects that are long-term.
that's true.
All right.
So,
Thank
so
you.
yeah, so,
I'll try to be brief on the rest of it. So this is a breakdown of expenditures by category, essentially showing the public, where our funding is majorly going. Public Works, as I mentioned, a high increase in capital projects that we're doing, our road projects, so they're the bigger chunk. Health and Human Services are essentially our biggest department. Health and Human Services having so many divisions: public health, community service, workforce development. So it one of the larger ones. County Administration Office as well, but County Administration, as we'll see in the following slide, contains various divisions. Within there, also the Disaster Recovery ARPA funds. So that's why that one seems a little bit more inflated than the others. Our Sheriff's Office, our Behavioral Health, and various other departments here. Now touching a little bit in the general fund, I'd skipped to this previously to talk about the unfunded positions. Increase from essentially last year to this year, 14.8 million, which essentially is 13 million of increase to expenditures from capital. Essentially, general fund contribution either going to the capital project fund or to the road infrastructure fund to cover one-time expenses either for capital projects or road projects. The majority of this funding, essentially 12 million, we're going to hopefully use the Ward Home lawsuit money and ARPA money, as well as other one-time sources of revenue. So essentially, on the general fund side, the bigger jump in increase from last year to this year is mainly revolves around one-time funding, one-time projects. So, and that's what we've been trying to make sure that we're addressing, and then trying to manage our position costs as best we can. As I mentioned in the prior slide, difference, County Administration Office being, one of the bigger ones. On the side here, I essentially have all the various departments: Administration, IT, Human Resources, Office of Emergency Services, Disaster Recovery, which manages essentially our ARPA money, FEMA, Animal Control, Risk Management, Veterans Affairs, Public Defender, Ag Extension, Grand Jury. Another reason why it shows also inflated in a way is because this also holds our non-department and our contribution divisions. So these are essentially expenses where it's not a one department expense, it's more of a county expense. Those get charged out of that one. This also holds our contribution division, where if we are going to be funding a project out of the capital project fund or a road fund, this shows as an expense out of that one. So that's why, the county administration one looks a little bit larger. It's not that, we're just shoveling money one way or another. And then the rest of these are the different departments out of the general fund: Sheriff's Office, Auditor, Controller, Probation, Community Developments, which is Public Works, one of the divisions in Public Works as in Public Works Administration, Assessor's Office, District Attorney, County Council, Library, Act Commissioner, Treasury, and Board of Supervisors. And then a couple of smaller ones. So this is just essentially the link to our recommended budget. We have it online. As I mentioned early on, it's at the top in a header. Essentially, once you access it, it has a breakdown of essentially all the different budgets that we've discussed. As I mentioned, usually clicking it, you'll be able to enter, gives you overview of the department, and then you'll see staffing, and then you'll see a recommended budget where it's essentially what I had mentioned, Schedule 9 and 15, going from one year to the next. And going back here to our presentation. So for anyone at home wanting to, as we go through individual budget units, or if there's anything on the consent where deliberation is needed to take place, we'll definitely be able to pull those units up and have a discussion. So, yeah, I guess going right into the differences between the consent and the regular agenda. So on the consent agenda has been budget units that we've set aside from, normal cost increases, so the cost of doing business, whether it's, the increase of gasoline for vehicles or increase in paper costs for some departments. Those and then other kind of larger significant, or not as significant, but still significant changes. So our labor agreements, and these are all been items that the board has approved already. So labor agreements, so that we have for our different bargaining units, our service contracts that have been coming to the board in the last couple of meetings and will be coming after. Renewals for some of those contracts or extensions, our PERS contribution, which is going up, not down, our OPEB contribution, and the difference is more or less these are costs that the board has already approved and they've been baked into the consent items on the budget. Regular agenda, these are budget units where more of a large significant changes have been taking place, or there's been items that had been previously omitted with the published budget, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed them in the public setting, that the public and that the board was aware of a change that either the county administration office is requesting or that we feel that needs to be shown in a light. It also includes any supplemental adjustments, and essentially what this also will include is updated costs or any missing information that was omitted that we need to make sure that we address it in a public setting during a regular agenda. Any kind of other additional information that we wanted to cover, essentially that we're going to see, either in this budget or in the upcoming budget year, are reorganizations that are taking place with our resource management agency. That's underway. Our reorganization with our IT, information technology department. Other one, which will be taking place actually January 2nd, our office of our clerk, auditor, recorder elections. The board had previously agreed to essentially, split the department, and with the elections that took place, we will now have another elected official, and essentially that department will be split coming January 2nd. So that was a little bit fun trying to address or figure out how we were going to do that in the budget, but I think working with the departments, we were able to get that taken care of. There's a couple other departments that are that you may see something throughout the upcoming year. Looking at our behavioral health department and our health human services department through an organizational review. Another thing is essentially we had flexibly staffed positions, as I mentioned in the prior slide. We're looking at addressing retention, succession, and flexibility within those positions. So those are some of the highlights, and those were brought up by various departments, or administration office, or ag commissioner's office, or assessor's office, our auditor's office, probation, roads, RMA, HHSA, community service, workforce development, our victims witness, and within AB 109. So various departments are concerned about, whether it's succession or retention, or even having some sort of flexibility in positions that they already have approved, and that's one of the items where we've addressed and we've looked at, and now that we have a human resource manager on our side, that's something that we're going to be looking at. And some of these we just wanted to highlight. You may see some of these items come back to the board through the year, and we just wanted to make sure that the board was aware, because typically we like to take everything and take care of everything with the budget, but sometimes because there's some reorganizations, we like to make sure that at least right now the board is aware of some things that we're working on. So with that, I will hand it back to the chairman, to look at our consent agenda.
So, first we go to public comment, right?
For consent items, that's correct.
Yeah.
For members of the public,
Madam
if
Clerk.
in chambers, please provide a speaker card. On Zoom, please press *9 or the raise your hand icon. First up, we have Felipe Velasquez.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Velasquez. I live at 620 Dry Creek Road. Is this on?
Back.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Felipe Velasquez. I live at 220 Dry Creek Road, Hollish, California. My wife is here also. If I run up my 3 minutes, she'll finish up the presentation. She doesn't want to, but we were informed we couldn't transfer the minutes. I'm here to address the maintenance of drainage ponds on Dry Creek County Service Area number 48. Approximately 3 years ago, I contacted Jessica Stratton, the former San Benito County Service Area Coordinator, regarding the maintenance of the drainage pond located on my parcel. That's 220 Dry Creek Road. And I think page 3 shows a highlight, an aerial view of the parcel where I live. Ms. Stratton informed me that San Benito County had issued a master contract for drainage pond maintenance. Ms. Stratton came to view the drainage pond on my property and informed me that she was not aware of this drainage pond and it was not included in the master contract. Ms. Stratton had a crew come and maintain the drainage pond. Ms. Stratton informed me that in the coming years she would amend the master contract for drainage pond maintenance to include the pond located on my parcel. Last year, approximately in May and June, I called Ms. Stratton to inquire when the drainage pond would be maintained, and I was informed she no longer worked for the county. I spoke to a gentleman in the Resource Management Agency and informed him on the need for the maintenance of the drainage pond due to the high risk of fire because of the 4th of July fireworks activity in the neighborhood. The gentleman had a crew come in and maintain the drainage pond. This spring, I spoke to Mr. Reed Sanders, San Benito County Service Area Coordinator, inquiring as to when the drainage pond on my parcel would be maintained. I requested that it be maintained prior to the 4th of July, again, because of the high fire risk. On May 12th, Mr. Sanders sent me an email informing me that it was determined that the county was not responsible for maintaining the drainage pond on my property because it was considered private property. On May 13th, I responded to Mr. Sanders explaining why I disagreed with his determination. In addition, on that date, I came to the county administrative office wanting to get some financial information for CSA 48, and I spoke to Mr. Orozco and Ms. Mr. Gabriel Orozco and Ms. Dulce Alonso, explaining the situation. They stated that they would look into this matter and get back to me. On June 23rd, last week, Ms. Alonso called me and asked if someone from the Resource Management Agency reached out to me to resolve the drainage pond issue. I told her no one had contacted me. That is why I'm here today to escalate the issue to your board's attention. In summary, I believe the county is responsible for the maintenance of the drainage pond on my property. You want my wife to continue, or I can continue?
So your wife, if she can pull out a speaker card, she can get 3 minutes herself also. Yeah.
Okay.
Laura Munoz Velasquez.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members.
Can you bring down the mic for her, please?
Excuse me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Take your mask off.
Not
Thank
very.
you.
There you go.
Okay, going back, in summary, we believe that the county is responsible for maintaining the drainage pond on our property for 3 reasons. Number 1, the private property argument made by Mr. Sanders has no merit because the Dry Creek Road is on private property that is maintained by the county through County Service Area 48. Therefore, the county should be able to maintain the drainage pond even if it is on private property. Secondly, California Civil Code Section 845 provides that owners of easement are responsible for the maintenance of the easement. San Benito County is the owner of a drainage easement for the drainage pond in question. A copy of California Code, Civil Code, Section 845 is included in your handout. Lastly, it is unfair and discriminatory for the county to just maintain one drainage pond and not the other within CSA 48 when all property owners are paying for CSA assessment for road maintenance and drainage facility maintenance. In conclusion, we request that your board take two actions. First, pull from the consent agenda the Dry Creek County Service Area Number 48 budget and move it to the regular agenda for discussion and consideration. Secondly, the board direct the County Administrative Office to work with the Resource Management Agency and County Council Office to determine who is responsible for the maintenance of the drainage pond located on parcels located at 200, 220, and 240 Dry Creek Road, Hollister, California, and report back to the Board of Supervisors within 90 days. Thank you.
Thank you. CAO Espinoza, can we get clarification on that address and that drainage pond if it pertains to CSA 48?
We can do that. It's up to your board what you want us to do. We
And
can
it,
do that.
I know, and without speaking out of turn, I'm not sure which supervisor's district this is. If it's Betsy's.
It's Supervisor,
Yeah.
District 1.
I think it's
Supervisor.
supervisor.
The Dry Creek Road is approximately half a mile east from Sunny Slopes School. If you turn right, it's Cerro Vista. If you turn left, it's Dry Creek. It's a 1 acre development that was developed back in the 80s.
Thank you for the clarification. So yeah, if we can have someone help from staff to clarify, and then Supervisor Dirks can engage to address the issue. Any other comments, Madam Clerk?
Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. We have no further comment.
So, Mr.
From
Chair,
here, we commence public hearings, right? So we open up the public hearing. Any discussion or items that wish to be pulled by the board?
well, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, do we need to have this item pulled from the consent agenda, or can we?
It's really going to be a separate item with regards to, is it our jurisdiction or not? Is it private property or not? I would say today why we're here is for budget and budget purposes only. My only recommendation to Gabriel is there enough funds to potentially budget or cover this if the board so chooses to do that in a month or a couple months from now, if the board wants to move forward with it, and if it's something that we can do after further discussion. So is there enough funds to do the work that they're requesting?
Let me hop on to show CSA 48.
I mean, the main issue is jurisdictional authority. If it's our
That's
authority,
right.
then obviously that means it's.
But I think there's going to be some work that we have to do to make sure, to see if it is within our jurisdiction or not.
Yeah, and that's where
We have to come back to the
clarification.
board at another date about that. That's a separate item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
can I
Yes,
speak?
Supervisor
Can you
Dirks.
guys hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is Supervisor Dirks. This was brought to my attention. Mr. Velasquez called me Friday. And so I haven't had a chance to speak with him yet, obviously, but I'm glad he's here because now it's to everyone's attention. Yeah, I think I did mention it to Steve. And so I said, I got a voicemail regarding this, but in any case, I do think we need to look into it to see where the rights are.
Well, that being said, are there any items on the agenda that wish to be pulled by the board?
I would like to make sure we pull, the CSA item from Fund 270, at least the CSA 48, to make sure it's resolved.
Yeah, I'd like to pull item 10, that's the Board of Supervisors, and I'm not sure on the numbers, 10.10. County Council, 25.33. And then the Vets Park and Historical Park items, 7056 and 7057.
If you don't mind, Supervisor Cosmic, can you just put in the actual number itself so we're clear? Because when you're going through the budget unit itself,
That's where I'm confused as well.
just
So
give us the number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number.
The first
So
two
in the case of
The Dry Creek, so that would be
Dry Creek was
item number 91.
91,
70
Dry
dot,
Yeah.
3,210. Okay.
But just put in the
Okay,
first.
so just the 91 part is what
Just
you're
give us the 91
first
part.
two
So
Yeah.
item 10,
Yeah, perfect.
which is the board.
Okay.
Item 25, which is county council. I'm just saying them too, just in case. Wait, it's
No,
not
that's
county
vets.
council now.
That's vets.
I'm sorry. See, that's where I'm, 33, I apologize. So 33, county council.
Okay.
And then the Vets Park, let me see here. 1 second. Now I have to get this right.
56?
Yeah, you're 56 and 57, and I had previously, just this morning, talked briefly about whether that could potentially get lumped in with the ARPA discussion, the disaster recovery discussion, because my questions on those relate to the capital costs that are within those budgets.
Okay.
So, and the chair had suggested we lump in 56 and 57 into
together.
the,
Correct.
That's fine.
disaster
That's fine.
discussion.
That's fine.
Any other? So that being said, for clarification, yeah, 56, 57 will be lumped together, and then 10 and 33. Can I get approval of all the other items on consent?
Hold on, I'm not quite finished. I just questioned, since we had issues with clarity and lack of transparency in terms of the budget not being fully available to the public, nor to me as a supervisor, I question if this is proper going forward. And if it doesn't rise to the level of a Brown Act violation, maybe as a Budget Act violation. So I would like to get a ruling from County Council. We pride ourselves on being transparent, and if I personally couldn't find it, I can imagine members of the public couldn't find it.
Barbara, can you answer that, please?
Yes.
I think we need clarity.
I was
Excuse
just
me.
looking at the provisions of the Budget Act. It does say that the budget has to be made available to the public, but I do note that it was on the county website. The Brown Act did list all the topic of the budget being considered. And so even though it wasn't linked directly in the Novus agenda item, it was available to anyone that went onto the website or did ask the clerk of the board for access to it. I don't think that it prohibits the board from going forward today on the budget. I could not find right now, just indicating any specific provisions of how it had to be made.
Agendized, but it was just the presentation and then the added addendum, I believe that was missing. But in general, the actual budget was public and posted in due time.
Yeah, that's correct.
Any other comments, CAO? So, does that satisfy your question, Supervisor?
Yes, I just wanted to raise the question and the concern, to make sure.
So, any other consent items to be considered?
No.
Okay. So can I please get a motion to approve all of those except for item 10, 33, 56, and 57?
So moved.
And 91, sorry.
Oh, 91 also?
Supervisor Gonzalez asked to pull that one.
Okay, I apologize. So
Yeah, the Dry Creek one, yes.
Supervisor Gonzalez, yeah, 91. So can I get a motion to approve all of them except for 10, 33, 56, 57, and 91?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. 5-0. So if we can get item number 10, Gabe?
So item number 10 here is our Board of Supervisors item. Now,
Yeah, so I can go, Gabe, that's fine. So kind of an overlying theme that you probably are going to hear from me today is that I'm just extremely, extremely concerned about the state of the economy. And even since our last budget meeting, which was in May, our economy has taken quite a turn. And I think we have to be really, really frugal today. And so I'm looking at a lot of they might seem like smaller things, but I think the smaller things oftentimes add up and are fairly significant and can also show that we're committed to being as frugal as possible. And I'm looking at the travel costs for this Board of Supervisors that add up to $20,000, with lodging at $11,000 and transportation at $9,000. And I would like to at least entertain the possibility of cutting that. I would suggest cutting that in half, and that all of us be very cognizant about what venues and what events and what conferences are truly going to be beneficial. I can tell you that I have not, I don't think I've spent a dime of travel costs for this county in a year and a half. That doesn't mean that I'm not busy or that I'm attending a lot of things by Zoom. I put as much time into this job as anybody. But I do think that $20,000 is excessive. You break that out, you have $4,000 per supervisor. I don't know where the $4,000 is going, frankly. So I would like to suggest cutting that in half to $10,000. So $11,500 on lodging and $4,500 on transportation for a total of $10,000 on travel.
So are you suggesting, Supervisor Kosmicki, that every supervisor pay for half of whatever the costs
I'm
are?
suggesting that we all be more conscious in the next, I don't know what the cost was last year, and maybe Gabe can elaborate on that when you combine transportation and lodging for the Board of Supervisors, but looking forward, I don't expect to travel. If I do, it's going to be under $1,000. I can tell you that, so somebody else can use the other $1,000 in my 1/5 of this travel budget. But yeah, I would just really highly suggest that we be more cognizant, because I'm just very, very concerned that we're going to be back here within a year or two at some point talking about cuts, and we're going to be going through these things. I'd rather get ahead of it now, and I just don't see the need for $20,000 in travel. I just think that's excessive in general.
Actually, I'll counter that in that I think it's highly important for supervisors to avail themselves to the training that's available. I have been working on my my leadership credential, and for the last year and a half, I have not submitted any travel expenses. I have gone to the CSAC conferences and so forth, and I've actually just picked up a check for the December reimbursement from last year that I didn't even submit, that was submitted for me. So some of us are spending our own money for travel, and so I would like for that to be there and left available for us, and I don't want it to be taken away. It'll behoove us and our constituents if we can maximize as much training as possible. And so I would disagree with taking it away. I am adding to my ability to do my job better by availing myself to the additional conferences and so forth. And then as part of going to RCRC, I went to one meeting leaving here directly from Board of Supervisors meeting, and I personally expended about $800 that I did not submit the bill to the county. So I don't want to take that amount away. I want that there to avail for us to be able to use it if we need it.
I just think 4,000 is a lot per supervisor, and plus when you take mine out, you all can have that 4,000 because I'm not going to spend it.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is, can we look at looking into the future? As far as I'm concerned, we're going to be talking about cuts here anyhow. I'd rather set a good example now as a board and say I don't need $4,000 in the next year for travel as an individual. I don't imagine anybody on this board is going to use $4,000, I hope. So can we at least be reasonable and say $2,000 per supervisor certainly seems like enough, unless we're traveling out of state multiple times?
Well, if we don't use it, it stays there, right? So isn't it better to have it available to us than to not?
Why would we use it? We use it if we don't need it.
I just think it'd be keeping it as a line item in the budget to have it there available
Yeah, and I'm
to
just
us.
saying it's excessive. I'm
Yeah.
just saying 4,000 per district is excessive for travel. I want to point
You have
that
a
out
comment,
publicly.
Supervisor Tiffany?
Well, I just have a question. Gabe, can you, I'm just curious how much of that has been spent, because I'm kind of thinking that maybe significant amount has not been spent, but I'm just curious.
I would say a significant amount has not been spent. The only ones that were more of essentially the bigger conferences that we had gone to, like the CSAC conference is typically the bigger one that we go to. And aside from that, smaller trainings that we attend, I would say that out of the $20,000 one, you're probably hovering around, I would say a little bit over 10,000, because even looking at prior years here, for example, 1920 fiscal year, we spent about 10,000. Obviously, then COVID came in after, so the year before that, everything went to virtual. So 2021, we didn't have that much. This year, everything's more or less ramping back up. So we are probably around 11, 12,000 this year. Typically, what we budget for is looking at historical, to see where we've been, to have that sort of flexibility. And now that everything is beginning to open up, it's essentially back up to the board's discretion to see if they would like to have that flexibility there, or if they want to be a little bit more conscious of the of what leadership trainings or seminars they're going to. And that's ultimately the board's decision to make based off what's budgeted.
And I will add 25,000 in membership dues as well. I've kind of skimmed over my own notes there. That seemed kind of high. What are all these memberships that cost $25,000 when we're talking about whether to add positions or not? And then we're sitting here with $45,000, and I know we have to have some memberships, the essential stuff, but 25,000 also jumped out to me.
CAO Espinoza, if you can answer that.
CSAC memberships, any of the larger memberships that we're a part of with either the state or
TSAS.
RCRC, NACO.
RCRC, NACO,
There's
yeah.
quite a few
Are there any
memberships.
any that make up a bunch of that aren't needed? Because 25 grand seems like.
So, while CSAC, right, what is it, the California State Association of Cities and Counties, right? So it's the money, and so I would agree, and Supervisor Kozmicki brings up a good point. It's a lot of money, but everything in government is a lot of money, and I'm not justifying it. Ultimately, what's important in my mind is, what is the priority of the board? Is it to understand state and federal issues, to understand the implications of whether it's the laws or the funding streams, grant processes? There's a lot of learning, like Supervisor Gonzalez had mentioned. And is it a priority for us to learn? Would we rather just stay local in our understanding and our relationships? There's a lot of, I know when I've gone to NACO, Washington was an expensive trip, but just the same, you're meeting folks from across the state and across the nation that are elected officials throughout the regions, and you understand a little bit of the nuances of the way federal funds are distributed. In that conference, I actually sat in expecting an understanding on ARPA and its funding streams and the rules that were going to be applied and how these funds were going to be distributed. And so we wouldn't have that opportunity if I hadn't gone. So if the will of the board is for us to not go outside of the state and learn, then I guess you have a justifiable point.
I just want to make sure that we're not throwing money at the wall we have to have NACO and CSAC. I get that. I'm just saying 25 grand. I just want to make sure that those are the essential ones and nothing beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, and just so the board is aware, I think Supervisor Gonzalez had said this, the number is there. It's going to be spent for that purpose. If it's not, then we don't spend it,
Okay.
and it goes back into the general fund. However, I think you bring up a good point too as well, concerning trying to be as accurate as we can with the budget and forecasting, because I think that's important, especially with the possibility of a downturn. So I can see both points of that. It's really going to be up to your board what you want to move forward with. You want to have travel or not, and that's up to your board.
And I'm not saying cut it. I'm just saying 10,000, which I think
or cut it.
And you
yeah.
take mine out of it. You all have 2,500 each if you want it, because I'm not going anywhere.
Well, also, too, potentially, we could have 3 new supervisors coming on board, and with 3 new supervisors, they're going to have
good
expenses
point.
2 times 3, 2 for certain, but possibly a third. And so we need to just make sure the funds are there.
And that brings up a good point for the new board members. They typically travel to Sacramento. They have a 2-day or a 3-day training, and they have multiple days. So it's usually 3 sessions for the year.
The new
3 multiple
Supervisor
day
Institute.
Yeah, but it's not
sessions.
$4,000.
Wow.
And I might,
That's just one element of it. I'm
Yeah,
just
if you're there for 3 days, you're
just
eating 3 times a day.
outside of the associations and the travel, and
Also-
I mean, there's plenty of RCRC meetings that
yeah, I might add that as part of the, and, you know, I know we're not talking about this, but, you know, RCRC membership, I mean, it's really critical in, you know, CSAC, critical to the county, the information we get. But what I was going to say is that within the RCRC membership, for example, there is travel reimbursement that comes from RCRC. It does not come from the county. Now, we pay for it ultimately through our membership. So, but anyway, I just wanted to point out, there's not a double dip there.
Yeah, anything outside of, that's a good point, Supervisor Tiffany. Anything outside of the scope of what the intent of that is, our auditor is very good about making sure that he vets that and we don't spend monies beyond our, what we're supposed to.
I don't want to belabor it. It's 20,000, but for me, 20,000, going through this budget, all these dollars add up. You're going to hear this from me again and again today. I'm trying to find areas where it's not totally essential for us to spend so that we maybe have a little, you know, more room elsewhere. And to me, $20,000 is too much for travel. So I would entertain cutting it in half, or at least cutting it somewhat. If no one wants to support that, then I'll just vote against that item. That's all.
Mr. Chair, if I can make a comment as well. So I agree about the fact that we need to be educated. We have a couple, maybe 3 new Board of Supervisors coming up. And so into a new position and things need to be available. I understand Supervisor Kosmicki's concern as well. I'm just wondering how it, especially if it's broken out by supervisor, which seems to be, I suppose, fair. However, depending on whatever committee you're on, although Supervisor Tiffany, you're saying that RCRC kind of reimburse itself, because depending on what committees we're all on, it sometimes depends on what meetings we go to as well. So I don't know if that is factored in at all as well. Because maybe there will be one supervisor who's going to more stuff than others, just depending on what committee they're on. Is that an accurate statement, Ray?
Because then it ultimately falls upon the chair's appointment to, you know, who's on which committee and that, so that may change.
yeah, my only additional comment is, and I do agree with Supervisor Kosmicki, I think we have to be cognizant of, you know, the economy and what potentially could come forward. I mean, this, one way or another, there's not a lot of money here. I understand it's almost more of a gesture than anything. But what I would suggest, because we're going back and forth to this, is that this could be earmarked as something that would be one of the first things we would cut. Because it's certainly, it's, you know, somewhat optional type of thing. We don't have to travel, but I do think with the new supervisors coming on board, I would suggest we leave it as is, but then we earmark this as well as certain other areas as some of the first things we could look to cut as we go forward. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So to clarify, you don't want any, if there's a recession, we cut any further learning for the board?
Well, I'm just assuming that as we go through this budget, just as you already said, Gabe, we're going to be tracking this on a quarterly basis, and as need be, we're going to make adjustments if necessary. There's not a lot of money in this particular bucket, but there's some.
Yeah.
And every little bit adds up. I agree with that. Anyway, I'm just saying this could be one of the areas that we are looking at, and I'm sure there's many others as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think in my head, the way that I've always viewed a budget is essentially staff is the last thing that I'm touching programming. I would look at any little pockets, for example, like this, where, you know, it's nice, but you're looking at a necessity, maybe I could do without it. Sometimes look at fixed assets, vehicles, you know, it'd be nice to get a new one, but can the old one
Sure.
still handle it? Things like that. So those would be the areas we'd look at first.
Right. And for that matter, if we were to go and look at every of these budget items, I'm sure there's travel
Yeah.
budgets within each department that potentially could be cut
Yeah,
if we had to.
that's correct.
And I would suggest that would make more sense than having to cut people.
Oh,
So,
of course.
Of course. So, anyway, I'm just saying that I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but I think this is something that we can, as we go, we can look at.
Definitely.
And I do agree with Supervisor Kuzmicki that travel expenses are, you know, it's a discretionary thing. It's not, the county's not going to grind to a halt if we have to cut back eventually
So
in that area.
Can I get clarification, Supervisor Tiffany and Kosmicki? Can we get a vote, and what is that motion, so we know exactly what we're talking about?
Someone else will have to make that motion.
I move that we approve item number 10 as is, but I don't know if there's a second there for that.
I'll second it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Was that a temporary due pass? Are we doing that?
Yes, that's correct. It's a temporary due pass, Mr. Chair.
So can I get a motion for temporary due pass on item number 10? And it sounds like Supervisor Gonzalez had requested as is. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
Motion passes 4-1. So item 33, this is again Supervisor.
Yeah, and I'll try not to try not to create a huge conversation on all these. So County Counsel's office. So I'm a bit alarmed that the budget it just keeps climbing. Now we're at $2.26 million. I've repeatedly expressed to the County Council my desire to work on continuing to look at reducing the cost of outside litigation. I know there's some litigation where you have to do it, but I also think that it needs to be more of a focus for us to really make it a serious goal of reducing the amount of outside litigation costs. And now within this budget, we're being told in the document that there's a paragraph in there that there's a desire to systematically increase those costs over time. It mentions $50,000 a year over the next several years to get up to I believe, $1 million. And this is also, meanwhile, while we're adding positions to the office. So as I've said, I'm against increasing outside litigation. I would instead, and I've said this, so this is nothing new, I would like to see more of a priority given to resolving cases more expediently, and I'd like to see our county counsel's office do more courtroom work, to be really honest, and spend less time in meetings such as committee meetings and ad hoc meetings. Sometimes we'll have a committee meeting and there's 2 or 3 attorneys in the meeting, and I just don't think that that's the best use of our time. So I don't think it's a great use of resources, and so as long as there's an expectation to continually increase the cost of outside litigation as opposed to using our own staff on that, then I will not be supporting this allocation. Thank you.
There was if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Gabe.
Thank you. There is an increase. If you see a department request, what was requested for outside litigation was $750. The county administration office dropped it back down to $700 where it was previously. One of the items that I had discussed with Barbara was, and I think I'd shared my comments with Ray, is looking at essentially what our caseload is for the need to have some outside attorney. I know that they are especially when we have those specific cases, they're good to have a specialist from that type of litigation, and they're good to have on hand. But county administration is kind of the same opinion that if needed, bringing in-house attorneys, we feel like would be most beneficial. And then ultimately, potentially bringing down this outside litigation cost. But for any kind of further comments, I'd probably leave it to Barbara if she has anything else.
Right. Gabriel, do you have a copy of what their outside litigation costs are to date this year? Even though we budgeted that amount, just because I hate to come back to the board mid-year asking for more money when you might not have it in your uh, contingency budget, we do try to keep it under that amount and at as low as possible. And part of the reason I was trying to increase it is not because I expect litigation costs to continually increase, but just in the unforeseen circumstances. And this isn't new. Matt Granger recommended this years and years ago, that first of all, litigation costs not be in our office, that they be in like in some sort of general budget. But he also was a strong supporter of having $1 million budget for litigation costs. That way, if there ever is a big case, that you won't have to come up in a given year with a large sum of money to budget for appropriations, that it would already be there. And so it would be less of a hardship for the board. So we are trying to keep the outside litigation expenses I was suggesting still the same amount that I did put in that, but then after I did talk to Gabriel, I said that it was fine not to increase it this year. I was requesting the same amount, but we're still going to try to minimize those costs. And we are trying to work on, trying to resolve cases in an expeditious manner without using a lot of outside counsel costs. There's a couple cases that are going on. I'm not going to get into them in detail, but it kind of depends in certain times about how many cases the board has. And I'm happy to give the board an update on all the cases that we have with outside counsel if you would like. Do you have any questions? I can't hear very well. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I should be okay. I just want to point out, and I agree that, not just with the county counsel's office, but other departments. I mean, we've had this conversation about whether it be RMA or other departments. I think when we first get on the board, we see that we're going outside a lot, but there's reasons for it. I think in general, over time, you'd like to see more work being done in a house where we can. But specifically in the case of this area, there's such a broad area of legal. One attorney specializes in something very specifically, and it's hard, I think, in a small office like ours to have specialty in everything. And I also want to point out that we shouldn't lose sight that we've had some real successes here just in the last year with primarily, and I believe it was with outside counsel, being the primary, taking the primary role. But in terms of the Award Homes litigation, one of the reasons why we're able to have some one-time expenses for roads in this is because of that litigation, which was a major win for the county. There's also another matter that we just recently had a major win for the county, which will save the county a lot of money over time. So I understand Supervisor Kosmicki's point, but let's not be penny wise, pound foolish here. Unfortunately, litigation is just what we have to deal with in this day and age. And so we want to make sure we have the right people involved in the litigation. So I think we do have to trust, county council in making those decisions, when we go out, when we have to go outside. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Supervisor Gonzalez?
Nothing to add.
Okay.
I just think we should leave the budget as is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I add one, if possible, I don't know if it's possible to just take that paragraph out? Are there implications to having that in there? Basically,
What paragraph?
We could take
it
it out.
says that there's a desire to add $50,000 a year until we get up to $1 million. I just think then we're setting an expectation for increasing costs as opposed to,
If it's the will of the
Managing,
board, I
addressing the
mean,
issues as they
if it's
come.
the
That's
will of the
correct.
board, what ultimately
If
will
it's the will of
happen?
the board, we can remove that. That's
Yeah,
not a-
and what will
I
happen?
would compromise and just, I see obviously where we're going, and I'm not suggesting that we cut the county counsel's office positions. I'm just, if we can take that paragraph out, then I would
Yeah. Yeah.
be willing
Well,
to
just-
support it.
To set expectations, Supervisor Kozemicki, what you're asking for is for county council, if there's an issue, for that to come before the board as a budget amendment, right? Because that's what's going to end up happening if we go outside of the budgeted amount.
That has to happen either way. I think it's
Yeah.
more
Well, and that's what
specific.
Barbara's point is, she doesn't want to have to keep doing that.
Yeah, if we're just talking about that language, I would be fine with
That's
supporting
fine.
that.
Okay, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can- we
I'll
can-
make a motion that we approve that item with the exception of the paragraph that mentions the $50,000 year increase.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
4-1. The Supervisor Gonzalez dissenting. Can we move on to now item 56 and 57 together?
And those were going to be with disaster recovery.
Yeah, well, so to clarify Supervisor Kozmicki's point, we'll get into the discussion about this one on the regular agenda. It's just a general request, for Gabe to explain
Yeah.
it to us.
So I think if the chairman may want, then we can hear item 91, since the other two items will get just, I guess, completed with the disaster recovery fund.
Okay, so
So CSA 48, I think would be.
So
I
I,
want to bring up CSA 48 first.
yes, and I just asked this to be removed too, because I received the phone call too. I just had family business, but I understand your concern. And I'm glad that this map was provided to us, thank you. But I just want to make sure that those concerns are taken care of, and if we do pass it as a, what was it, temporary what?
Temporary
As
due
a
pass.
temporary due pass, that this issue gets attention and gets resolved. So that's my concern.
And if the chairman would allow it, I quickly jumped to see CSA 48 does have a pretty healthy balance within its own specific CSA fund. And if we see just with what we're recommended, they're actually at a surplus. So if something needed to get added on so we can take care of that retaining pond to do some maintenance on there, if it's within through review with council and everyone, if it does fall within the county scope of responsibilities, as the member of the public mentioned, there are fees that are generated and they should be able to, cover that cost of maintenance, so.
So it'll get addressed, just because we have already had public comments there, but we definitely are going to direct staff to make sure they contact you.
Yeah,
I simply want to, if your board can give a date certain when the county offices have to return to your board to resolve it. That's why I put 90 days. Thank you.
Can we get that date? We'll let Betsy address it and make sure that she gets that confirmation. Supervisor Dirks, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I do want to further maybe address his concern about July 4th. So yeah, but I'll get with county staff on that because that's just a week away.
Yeah,
So,
well, and your constituent just wants commitment for a certain date,
okay.
that's all.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Can I get a motion, temporary due pass on item 91?
I'll make that motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, item 56 and 57. Thank you.
So now we're moving into the section of the regular agenda. Item 56 and 57 are going to be heard together with item 143, which
143,
is our disaster recovery budget unit 1047. So essentially what this unit covers is what we use for anytime we have FEMA expenses, or in this case, American Rescue Plan Act expenses. So what I'm going to cover first is the thoughts, or I guess the items that we've been bringing up from the ARPA ad hoc. I know we're going to have another one here coming up. Essentially, through the ARPA ad hoc, one of the items that we were waiting on from the federal government was for them to issue out their final ruling. For about a year, what we had to work with was the interim final rule, and then through collaboration with, taking public comments from state, federal, local, tribal governments, they were able to, dwindle down all these recommendations into a better, more put together, formatted guidelines. One big item that was brought through that final rule was the creation of a standard allowance, which allowed jurisdictions essentially the ability to claim up to $10 million of losses in revenue as a standard allowance. Now, the standard allowance essentially wasn't going to be asking there to be $10 million, it's just a claim. So what I had discussed with the ARPA ad hoc is it would be of interest for our county to claim that standard allowance $10 million. What that would allow the county to do was to take $10 million and essentially use it a little bit more flexibly towards different programs, through different projects. Essentially, how it would work would be we would claim a standard allowance, and I would put essentially $10 million of ARPA money towards government services, essentially freeing up $10 million that we could use for any projects or one-time expenses that we want to do. Some of the things that we had discussed in the ARPA ad hoc was potentially doing some projects, and Supervisor Kosmicki had pulled out both the Vets Park and the Historical Park. So some of these expenses, and actually some of the projects, as we have them mentioned in the capital infrastructure schedule, do reference the use of ARPA money to fund some of them. But if the board so chooses, we could say that any of these expenses related to some of these projects, to Vets Park or the Historical Park, we could use ARPA, but ultimately the board would need to provide us that direction, and I could look to essentially not have the expenses come out of the general fund, come out of ARPA through this expense recognition we can do with the standard allowance. So that's an item for discussion for the board. Essentially, for this upcoming year, as it pertains to expenses coming in, the disaster recovery fund is more or less back to normal. Where the expenses are mainly shown is on the general fund contribution, essentially transfers going out to cover some of these projects. So the flexibility is already built in. What we would need is board authorization to move forward with some of these, and ultimately the discussion is up to the board to see if that's the will that they'd like to take. With that, I'd give it back to the board.
So to clarify, we're officially on item 143 of the regular agenda.
Yes.
Supervisors, you guys, can we get public comment, Madam Clerk?
Chambers, if you would like to provide a comment, please provide a speaker card. Via Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. We have no comment.
Bringing it back to the board. What is the will of the board?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Supervisor.
So I had asked for just to clarify, the Veterans Park, there was a Veterans Park budget and the Historical Park budget were under the consent agenda. I asked to pull those to lump them in with ARPA, because recognizing that $640,000 was originally tabbed from the general fund for the Vets Park, and I believe 170 for the Historical Park project. Personally, I think it just makes all the sense in the world to use ARPA funding on those, because it's good either way. It's going to free up it's going to free up money either way, so it's not going to hurt us, and it will help alleviate the general fund spending by $830,000 or so. So that's why I'd asked for that to be considered for ARPA, and then beyond that, as long as I have the floor, I think we should also, even if we miss anything today, I think we should be very cognizant of ARPA going forward, especially since I totally agree with this strategy, and we've talked about it in the past of transferring over as much as possible to the general fund just to make it more discretionary. Not that we're not going to use the money on community projects and capital and things like that for the most part. So that makes all the sense in the world. A couple of additional real quick things I was going to suggest. We've had some requests, and I think the floodgates are sort of open now. We're going to, we got an email last week from Youth Alliance, and I've gotten calls from others. People are seeing that we have all this money that's kind of sitting there. So I would like to see us, I would like to see us really firm up the ARPA plan in the next couple months so that we have a plan, it's solidified, and we're not left with having to pick and choose, for instance, which nonprofits or whatnot we might want to support. So that's one, I'd like to firm it up. Two, one way to sort of address the inevitable of local groups coming and asking us, whether it's individual supervisors or as a group, I was going to suggest that we allocate somewhere around $20,000, $25,000 of ARPA funds into each district, just as we do every year with the general fund. And then we as supervisors could, we as supervisors could then opt where to spend those dollars. So then we are avoiding some of the political stuff with the group having to decide. And then we also would be minimizing the amount of remaining ARPA dollars perhaps that would go toward community groups, for instance. That's just, I think that would be, if we just allocated an amount to each district, and then if I want to give 25,000 to the food bank, or Bob wants to give 25 to the youth, or split it up and give 5 to this group, or trainings or whatever, I just feel like that, I just thought it was an idea just to, to deal with that. Otherwise, we're picking and choosing, and we're going to end up, if we end up choosing one or two nonprofits, A, it's not going to look good, but then B, everyone else is going to be coming. And we've already done, I think, is it 2 rounds of nonprofit funding?
Yeah,
I
through the
believe
CARES
if you go
Act,
back
yes.
to the first one, CARES, and then ARPA. So I'm just
CRF,
concerned that we're going to get continually pressured. So those are my main things. Again, to wrap it up, Vets Park Historical Park, use ARPA funding. I'm relying on our ARPA committee. I know they're doing a lot of work to really come back with us. I think in August we were talking about having ARPA back, and really in August I would hope really firm up that plan. And then my suggestion was to allocate a certain dollar amount, relatively minimal, to each district to have each supervisor divvy out as they choose. Thank you.
Okay. Supervisor Tiffany?
Mr. Chair, yeah, and actually Supervisor Gonzalez and I, myself, who are on ARPA, I think we're meeting on Wednesday, in a couple days here. A couple comments, and to your point, Supervisor Kuzmicki, it is true, I think, there's no question people start thinking, there's money there, so I got to try to grab it. And it's hard to, say no and pick and choose which nonprofit. We can certainly talk about this idea of maybe allocating a portion per district. I don't know. Obviously, that's something to consider. I think one thing, again, the reason why we've delayed a bit on some of this money is because there's some major expenditures potentially that we're looking to spend ARPA money with, and we just haven't quite determined whether, we're going to need that money. Now, it's true that we could move it into, as Gabe, you said, I mean, we can now have the ability to do out a general plan, but anyway, we'll certainly talk about this further in a couple of days, I know. Let me specifically to Vets and Historical Park, and I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, but I know we've already talked about using ARPA money for those 2 areas. How much money are we talking about again for, specifically for the, I guess it's the bathrooms and is it the lighting or striping?
Yes, striping, lighting,
With
bathrooms, bathrooms, and just improvements to the current facilities that are there, both for the historical park, I believe it's a bathroom, and then improvements to the one that's already there. For the Veterans Park, I believe it's lighting, striping, some other work. I know that
Resurfacing.
yeah, resurfacing the parking lot. And there's a couple of bigger projects related to the bathrooms there, which are on the pending list with ARPA, and we're seeing how maybe we can bundle that in with other potential projects that
Yeah.
that are going to be
I think
upcoming.
what we talked about in our last meeting, that we may not want to go full-blown with some of the stuff that's potentially necessary at Vets Park. But anyway, how much money are we talking about? Just remind me. As far as at least the more minimal areas of the bathroom, the striping, the lighting, the paving for Vets Park, and then the historical park.
Right.
What we talked about, how much, what was it again?
So for the historical park bathroom items, we had put, it was going to be about 750,000 out of ARPA money. And then for the Veterans Park, Veterans Park lighting, resurfacing, and signage and striping, it was about 250,000. So essentially, it's $1 million out of ARPA that's we have, and it's here actually in our capital project schedule that the board will also be approving, set to be funded through general fund / ARPA. We wanted to leave it there to provide that flexibility if the board wanted to, move forward with funding those projects specifically through ARPA, then it's essentially using that funding. But I know we wanted to make sure that they were addressed in one way or another, so we put the general fund on there to essentially be the second payer. But if the board so chooses, we can say ARPA and
Yeah,
fund it
Okay.
through
and
ARPA.
then just remove
So
the general.
there's not a double dip there, yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah, and I would be fine, I don't know Supervisor Gonzalez, but I think we've already kind of committed to that, and so I would have no problems having the ARPA spend that money as opposed to general fund.
Just to alleviate some of your concerns, Supervisor Kozmicki, we have been looking at improving the parks because, again, it's one-time money, and we want to make sure that the community benefits from whatever the expenditure is for the ARPA funds. And so we're definitely looking at the Riverview Park, we're looking at the Vets Park, and the Historical Park. So we're mindful of that.
And it sounds like, listening to you, and I don't know where you are, Supervisor Hernandez or Supervisor Dirks out there, but it sounds like we would be coming back in August. Probably that would be one of the recommendations, that we spend money from ARPA money for that, which means we don't have to spend it general fund.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify though, there was that $640,000 amount for Veterans Park. So you said
That's the
what's the
total.
difference between 640 and 250?
The difference is fixed assets are showing up within the specific budget units. There are in the capital project expenses for the capital project, salaries and benefits for the work that they do, expenses that show up on there. So the item that you're seeing in specific within the budget is just the fixed bathroom, the unit.
The 640.
Yeah, the 640.
So are we using ARPA on all this? I just don't see any reason why we wouldn't use ARPA for all of it.
Oh, yeah, we could. Yeah, that's the plan.
Because it's there, and
mhm.
it would free up money elsewhere down the line. It's not gonna affect future projects.
Yeah, so it's for the total project cost. Yeah, you could do that.
So it'd be more than, than the million.
No, it'd be the million. It'd be what is on the capital project schedule,
For this year, are you saying that, or?
2021, 22, the upcoming year.
Okay, I'm just, because again, when you talked about the million, it was
22,
250.
23.
223,
Yeah.
sorry, my apologies.
We are in 21, 22.
But you said 250 of the 640, and I apologize if I
Sorry.
just want to make sure that I have this right.
So I think what we can do, if it's all right with this board, what we can do is remove the general fund portion, any language related to that in the vets, in item 56 and 57, and basically have it funded out of the ARPA. And that's very easy, very clean. And then, but it,
It would still come back and it could be.
the board still, the ARPA committee is still going to meet. We're going to go through it. We're going to go through the budget.
I don't want to do that because then it would require it to come back to us as a budget transfer and a 4/5 vote just to get the funding back into those items number 56
Will it
and
be a
57.
4/5, right?
No, we would just change it to ARPA funding instead of general
But
But
fund.
if the ARPA
Just anything
funding-
related to general fund, it'd be used ARPA funding.
But if the ARPA funding couldn't cover it all, I wouldn't want these two funds to be jeopardized.
and that's
And so
your board
I
needs to decide
I need
that.
to leave that in, if it were my account, I need to leave that in there, and then if ARPA paid for a majority, if not all of it, then that would be funds that would stay in the general fund. So I don't want to remove it from here, until the expenses have been covered one way or another, whether through general fund or through ARPA funds. I don't want to take this away and deplete that funding. If we
Okay.
take it away, we'll
Yeah,
deplete the funding.
No, that's fine. It doesn't affect any future projects by using ARPA. It just
Right.
guarantees that we're,
It's just that we
Covering it
did
with
last year, we
ARPA.
had some sort of vote that we thought we were doing the right thing when we were looking toward nonprofits and giving more to Jovenes de Antaño, and it had a negative impact on the San Benito Chamber of Commerce. And I don't want to do that where we think we're doing something positive and it has a negative effect because we're not thinking it fully through. So if we could leave the funding here and then use the ARPA money where the board approves it, because again, we're just going to bring a suggestion, and then that way, there might be funds left that will roll back into the general fund as opposed to the parks.
I get what you're saying, but we're going to spend the 640 either way, so it doesn't really matter. If we use ARPA, that's just minimizing the impact to the general fund as a whole. That's all from an accounting standpoint.
Yeah, on the books, on the books.
You should see all the asks.
Mr.
of
Chair.
ARPA.
Well, we're not going to approve all those asks, so.
Yeah, I know.
So can I get a motion? What is the motion?
I think that's.
Mr. Chair, I have a
Oh,
comment.
okay, sorry about that. I didn't hear Betsy. Go ahead, Betsy.
It's okay. So I think just to kind of restate what Supervisor Gonzalez said, that is a concern I have as well. Supervisor Hernandez, I don't know if you might feel the same way since we're both on the Vets Park Commission, but what I don't want to do is not have the money allocated, and then for whatever reason, if the ARPA funds don't get approved, and Supervisor Kozmicki, I'm fully on board with doing the ARPA funds for historical and Vets Park, but if for whatever reason they don't get approved, whatever that reason may be, we still need to get the striping and things like that done at Vets Park. So I just want to, I think it's, a fail safe. Is that what I'm hearing, Supervisor Gonzalez?
Yes.
She said yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to second what Supervisor Gonzalez is saying, and just really making sure that we don't leave Vets Park hanging in particular, because there's just so much that needs to be done there. That's just my comments. Thank you.
Yeah, my only thoughts, ARPA's gonna come back, the conversation. I agree with Supervisor Kozmicki's sentiment, so if I can get a motion for temporary due pass item 10, it sounds like as is.
It's 56, 57.
56, 57, and
And
140.
143,
Oh, yeah,
you
the
do them all
50,
three.
67.
Do all three of them.
And 143.
I'll
So
make that motion.
are we making a motion to approve it out of the general, is that what you're asking?
Out of the general
Yeah,
fund.
for now.
Yeah, for now.
But there's a sentiment that we could
Support
potentially
ARPA.
are going
Yeah,
to
we'll
support.
definitely look at,
Just ARPA
plan
will be,
will, to use ARPA money, but we'll leave it there for now until we make that decision with ARPA.
till ARPA comes
We have
forward.
like $10 million left or something, 8 million?
8, about 8.
As I said, it keeps getting dipped into.
Well, not yet. We haven't
Used to be
approved it.
60.
Oh, it
So
has,
two
it
people
has.
is not an approval.
Yeah, it
I'll
used to be
second
60.
that. So item 56, 57, and 143.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. On to item 144, grand jury.
No, we're still on ARPA.
No, he just approved all three of
But
them.
we did 56 and 57.
Yeah,
And
and
143.
143, he stated it.
And 143.
Okay, so there's no interest today in looking at the allocation that I'd suggested. Is that something that?
There is when ARPA comes back.
Okay.
When we meet this week, we'll make sure we've voiced your
Okay,
concerns.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bring it back. Awesome. So the next budget unit, item number 144, the Grand Jury Division, Budget Unit 1025. So this is a separate division, essentially held on its own, separate from the county, separate from the Superior Court. They do work with their annual report that they put together, provide that to the courts and to the county. They essentially review the, government entities to make sure that the appropriate work is being done and that there aren't any faults being committed. We wanted to bring this item up. Essentially, their budget has been relatively stable besides the last couple year. They had a little bit of a downturn as well as other departments because of COVID. They're now more or less back up to full speed. Their budget, as it shows, is budget according to the ordinance that governs their compensation. So depending on how much they are, how many meetings they're allowed to attend or they're compensated per month, and, covering essentially those expenses that we more or less project going from the prior years to this year. This current year, we had an increase in expenses, the majority to get them set up with teleconference and video conference meetings to make sure that they're able to continue to move forward. So we had some technology improvements for them this current year, and this next year, those are more or less being handled, and the majority of the expenses are just going to be to cover their compensation for the meetings that they attend, and then any kind of smaller supplies and services expenses that they do have. With that, I'll turn it back to the board.
Mr. Chair, I have a question on this.
Supervisor Gonzalez, go ahead.
How do the grand jury members get compensated, and how frequently are they supposed to get compensated? I had one of them approach me, and one of the members, and said she had not been paid all year. And so I don't know how they're compensated, and so can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So the grand jury compensation is based off an ordinance that our county passes. Essentially, they are paid $15 per meeting they attend for a maximum of 8 meetings. Now I say meetings in general, but meetings intend both trainings, general meetings, committee meetings, when they have to do investigations, interviews, anything. So essentially 8 meetings in total is what the compensation is for. The other item that they are compensated for is mileage based off the IRS reimbursable rate. That's one that isn't pegged to meetings, so that one's just reimbursed at cost based off the rate. And there's been a change to how we've been essentially reimbursing them for their mileage and for their compensation for their meetings. Prior years, and actually I was looking back, at one point they were being paid annually. Essentially, the grand jury had a foreman, and the foreman would submit essentially just a one-time spreadsheet, and that's how they were compensated. Prior years, they were paid quarterly. And this current year, what I've moved to is to pay essentially monthly. For the first couple of months, we did a combination as everything was being set up. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time because as jurors change from year to year, we have to get them set up in our internal ERP system, get the vendors updated and in the system, and then after that, making sure that they're being paid. Essentially, then they submit a timesheet log. Someone within the organization is tasked with, being a treasurer, and then they submit those to me. I then get those logs, make sure that they are following the correct ordinance, and then make sure that they're compensated to what they should be. For the most part, everything this year was, and this is more kind of on the administration side, everything was moving smoothly up until we had some issues with essentially the way that they were compensating. There was questions as to whether the ordinance was being interpreted correctly, which I had county council review. Everything looked to be going smoothly, but nevertheless, I still did a reconciliation to make sure that everyone was being compensated appropriately based off the ordinance. And essentially, everything has been completed all the way up until the month of April. Actually, their treasurer last week submitted the time logs for May. So as you can tell, we're almost in July, and I got the time logs for May. So and by the time I get the June ones, it'll probably be closer to August. So there's some delay getting those over to me, and then on our side, getting those into the reviewed and then into the system to issue payment. within a couple of days. So we had a little bit of a bottleneck, but for the most part, we're.
And just for clarity purposes, the bottleneck was a misinterpretation by the grand jury on what was invoiceable or not. And that's, I think, where the issue came in. They were requesting more time than what was allowed by the board authorization. And so we had to go back, evaluate it, and look at it, and that's what the work that Gabriel was working on.
So that's 8 meetings at $15 per meeting?
Yes.
So they,
A month.
So to
a month.
clarify,
A month.
Per
So
month.
then they can,
Oh.
the new month, they can get another 8 meetings, and the next month, they can do another 8
Oh,
meetings.
okay.
It's
So to clarify, according to the ordinance by the Board of Supervisors, anything over 8 meetings obviously isn't covered.
is not invoiceable, and that's where the discrepancy actually
of
occurred,
mileage.
and then there was dialogue, and then there was a request to do reconciliation, and so that took the time.
So just to be clear, we're 8
Mike,
meetings,
Supervisor.
8 meetings, $15. We're paying essentially $120 per month
Per
to
member.
each
Per member, yeah.
per member. And is that throughout the year, basically?
No, every month, yeah. for
Yeah,
the
every
12
month,
Yeah,
okay.
12 months.
Assuming they
Yeah,
have,
right. Assuming they-
have 8 meetings.
That-
in that
that's
month.
right.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, all right.
Okay, so with nothing else said, can I get a motion?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I do have a question. So when I'm looking at this budget, and I know you said there was like a one-time thing for technology, is that why we're seeing under other charges suddenly went from 29,291, 2122 to essentially, just a couple $1,000 for this budget? And then I'm just curious, there's, on the flip side, there's a big jump from 16,000 to 28.5 under services and supplies.
So there's been a couple of administrative changes that we've done to their specific division. So the other charges component, the biggest piece of it is actually the cost plan expense. So the time that legal spends, reviewing or looking into something, or time that in administration I spent a portion of the cost through the cost plan get distributed, county auditor's office, and such departments, county IT, departments that do work with the grand jury, facilitating, working with them, the administrative expenses. So those are part of the other charges. So what you're seeing essentially, the bigger drop is from essentially, if you look at fiscal year 1920, 2021, because the cost plan is 2 years delayed, because the grand jury wasn't meeting as much because of COVID and they didn't have the technology in place at the time. The cost plan had a drop. The other expenses are now essentially just the cost plan from essentially 2 years back. And then on the other side, then there was a need to break up, like I mentioned prior years, the way that they would do compensation back to the grand jury was essentially a lump sum payment. At first, at the beginning, one time a year, then quarterly, and then throughout that time, it was also compensated, both the meetings and the mileage was compensated together. But then through some meetings with Leanne Godinez, the assistant auditor, we needed to break up those expenses into essentially the compensation for the training or for the meetings, and then the mileage compensations by itself. So that further then made it a little bit messy. So for the time being, the budget essentially as it shows is essentially cost plan expenses, services and supplies as it pertains to like paper, printers, ink, and compensation for their meetings, and then compensation for their mileage. Essentially, it's pretty bare bones budget.
And so basically, just in a layman's quick review, there's a larger number last year, and that was because of technology purchases. And then this year, we brought them more in alignment to where they should be at.
All right, thank you for the explanation.
Mr. Chair, real quick follow-up. So is there an understanding from the grand jury that this is your meeting cap you can't go over that. If you go over it, you're not going to get reimbursed for that.
Yeah, they are aware of that. They understand that, and they would like to meet with a couple of board members and the judges to understand kind of what their direction would be from the courts and in line to the budget, because there were some issues with regards to how they put the budget together as well, or the grand jury report, excuse me, and there was basically an overrun in some cases. So I think we need to have a better clarity from the onset. But I think that this is their take. They would like to address potentially receiving more funding in the future.
Yeah, and for me, you have to set that cap because it really requires them to be focused in their approach to what they do, and if you don't set a cap, then what are we doing here? So I just think you have to set that cap and stick to it every year, and that's pretty much.
So, I think that's what the ordinance does. The ordinance by default sets kind of a cap, but if the board so chooses to change that, that's up to the board. We wouldn't do it here in this budget meeting. It would probably be at a later meeting if the board so chooses. If not, if the board wants to stay with the same ordinance and the cap, then we just leave it.
Yeah. Are we?
Yeah, well, have we gone to public comment? I don't believe we have.
No.
I want to make sure before we vote. Can we go to public comment, Madam Clerk?
Members via Zoom, please press *9 or the raise your hand icon. You've been unmuted. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Elias Salinas, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to know if we could, the answer to how long have they been compensated at the rate of $15 per meeting? Also, it is time consuming and it's a lot of work for them. How long has it been since they've been at this $15? And I think that based on that, the board should consider increasing. I don't believe that the ordinance would restrict them from that, and I think that was already said. So I would like someone to bring back at a later time an agenda item discussing this, increasing the fees, and finding out. It's a lot of work, and some people have been there for years, and some people actually, don't stay a long time, and I think they should be compensated for the great work that they do. Thank you.
Their comment.
Okay, bringing it back to the board. So what is the will of the board? Can I get a motion?
I'll move to approve as recommended.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, 5-0. On to the sheriff. Operations. So Gabe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is item number 145, Budget Unit 1175, Operations for the Sheriff's Office. Essentially, the Operations Division is their patrol division. One of the kind of areas that we just wanted to highlight is just noticeable change from the prior year to this year, the addition of 2 new deputy sheriff's officers paid through the general fund. And if we have the sheriff here, if he wants to say a few words as well.
5 minutes, Sheriff? Just kidding.
I'm just here anticipating questions.
Yeah, so the main reason we wanted just to highlight it is we had, the addition to the sheriff's deputies. And another thing, there's a couple of items that I had discussed with the sheriff when we kind of met to look at the budget, looking at some potential flexibility with the upcoming restructuring of the purchasing policy to allow for recognitions and awards, particularly for some of the sheriffs. It helps with morale, and then in addition to that, a couple of items that the sheriff had mentioned that would be pretty good to both help us on the liability side, would be maybe some improvements to some of their some of their workout equipment or wrestling mats, so they could stay in shape and if they want to work out and be able to have it there available to them. So some of these things will be coming forward with the revisions to the purchasing policy. Currently, there are some hurdles there that make it a little bit hard, but there's kind of a couple of key areas we wanted to touch on with the sheriff's budget.
So, before we speak really quick, if I can go to public comment?
Sure.
Via Zoom, if you would like to press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. In chambers, please provide a speaker card. No comment.
Sheriff, yeah, I had one question, and this is just for clarification. I know that these are important positions and they're very much in need, but obviously it looks like it's one sheriff sergeant and then a lieutenant that would be am I looking at this right? The increase, can you clarify the importance and kind of the duties of how that's going to benefit our community?
I'll defer a little bit to Gabe on this because I think we're trying to clean up some numbers and kind of speak to a little bit what Supervisor Kosmicki mentioned before. I did some alternative staffing at increments after I took over as the sheriff. So I think part of it is clearing up those numbers. But really what the ask of the board is today is 2 deputy sheriff positions. It's not more administrators or a sergeant. But basically, we're going to reconcile those alternatively staffed positions and then backfill them with the entry-level deputy sheriff. Is that correct, Gabe?
Yeah, more or less, as the sheriff mentioned, as he took over the administration of the sheriff's office, there was a change in the way that he wanted to have his internal structure with creating the different boroughs instead of the way that it was set up before with corrections and then patrol and then administration. So with his creation, essentially, with the sheriff essentially at the top and then the Captain Keelan and then lieutenants underneath, there was some internal restructuring of the positions. And then what we're asking, essentially, the highlight of this particular budget item is the 2 completely new additions to the sheriff's budget. Everything else, we tried to work with the bounds and means of the current budget. Some of the positions reclassed down to lieutenants, so salary savings on that side, and then some positions classed up from either a deputy to a sergeant, or in some cases, sometimes from a sergeant to a lieutenant. So either way, internally, it flushed out to pretty much no net impact. Bigger net impact ones would be these 2 that are completely brand new.
And then, Mr. Chair, so I appreciate Gabe's explanation of that, and we've actually worked really well together in that process. Well, at least he has. I hope he feels the same about me. But so just for the public and for the board to understand, when I took over, there was a retirements with Captain LaMonica and Captain Eiler. Clearly, Sheriff Thompson was gone. So I was trying to recreate what my vision of our administration. I did a recruitment for captains, and I didn't get any qualified candidates. So I had a decision to make: either lower the standard for what a captain is, which I was not willing to do, or try to get creative and try to create some opportunities for professional growth within the organization for people that didn't qualify for that position yet. So what I did is I implemented more of a traditional sheriff's office format of a true second in command, who's Captain Keelan. And then for the first time in our office, we have our first ever female division commander, who's Kelly Kennedy. She's a division commander over administration. So really I have 2 seconds, 1 civilian, 1 sworn, and then we alternatively staffed some other positions to bring up and create some lieutenant opportunities in order to run these bureaus that I have. And one thing we never had in this office is a Community and Support Services Bureau, which I created, and that's one of the lieutenant positions. And it's already paying off with our community connections and the programs that we've started. The Agua con la Chota program that we just finished round 1 of is a thing that's in Lieutenant Urena's bureau. And so we did a survey before. We did a survey of the first group of 25, and there was a collaboration with Joe Tanasha Farms. And seeing the change in the trust of the group of 25 migrant farm workers, how they felt about the sheriff's office and government when they started that program, and how they felt at the end. It was a complete change and turnaround in their attitude and their connection to our office and to government. And actually, we had about, it originally was 5, I think we're up to 10 of those fathers have now enrolled their kids not only in the YMCA but in city sports because they didn't know that they were allowed to do that prior to those interactions that we had. So I think that community, I feel the Community and Support Services Bureau of our office is extremely important. And this is now just bringing up staff to backfill those positions.
Bringing it back to the board, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a question for maybe both Gabe and Sheriff Taylor. If I recall, when we last met, we talked about, when we were looking at requested positions, as you mentioned earlier today, there was, I think, a maximum of 400,000 that you had recommended. And we talked about, of that, 400,000, some of that going toward additional sheriff deputies. And so that, I assume that the two that we're talking about, that's what we're talking about, is part of that 400,000, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, just for clarification, that would mean we still have those positions to fill, as well as there are some additional other open positions, is that right?
Yeah.
That were already funded.
I pulled a report today. It's 8 total positions, 4 from ops and 4 from corrections, is what HR report pulled today.
So I defer a little bit here to Commander Kennedy. I believe in the operations side, we're up to staff, unless we might have one. So I think that's where you're seeing it. So we've filled those positions. We have 3 laterals that we've brought on, and we have 2 in about to start the academy. So even though physically they're not on the street right now, and that's kind of what I expressed to the board before. If we keep pushing off, adding staffing to the sheriff's office, we come across these certain groups of candidates where we have a handful of great candidates that are really going to impact our community. And if I don't have those positions open, I can't hire them. And then that's where we are today, is it with this candidate pool that came to us, luckily, with some lateral experience from Marin County, from Soledad, and from, I can't remember where the other lateral's from, but we actually have a lateral that has sergeant experience. We have a lateral that has detective and field training officer experience. And they're coming here for quality of life and opportunity to serve this community. So those and the 2 entry-level positions we have, I find myself at the problem now of, if I get more qualified candidates tomorrow, I need positions to put them in.
And then just to follow up, with these 2 positions, with the ones that you're just recently have filled, and these 2 new positions that you're filling, in actual practical terms, will that, I know you've talked before about trying to have a situation where there's transitions between the 2 shifts. There's also, of course, been discussion about getting some coverage in South County. I'm just curious where that shakes out once these positions are fully filled.
So getting, if we have these 5 positions out of training, it's going to bring us up to where we should be for our 4 patrol shifts right now, because we are short. As a matter of fact, as we go to our shift change, one of our shifts is back to 1 sergeant, 1 deputy again. But Deputy Turpin, based on his, if any of you followed his performance at the rodeo yesterday, that should be enough to get that poor guy off of training. But he did a clown routine for the audience out there, and it was pretty good. So Deputy Turpin should be coming off of training pretty soon, and then that's going to bring that shift back to a sergeant and 2, which is really not enough, but it's where we've been operating for a while. So having all these positions come out, then our patrol staffing alone should be a sergeant and 3 per shift, but that does not get us to that swing shift that I'm looking for that extra coverage. That's something we're going to have to tackle down the road.
And does this affect South County again any further?
It absolutely can affect South County. So it's a thing that I'm working out with the Deputy Sheriff's Association right now, is that minimum staffing as it is right now for them is 2. I think that's crazy, to be honest with you, to only have 2 sworn deputy sheriffs on the shift at any one time. So we're working through those numbers about how that's going to be. But we, by having these 5 come on board, it's going to make it possible for us to shift somebody down and be able to cover our South County at least halftime.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheriff Taylor.
Mr. Chair. The part about the training, the weights, I think that's a good approach. I'm just wondering, what is our current status with, workout equipment? This is a department that clearly you want to have that as part of the, I guess, operation or offering, I guess. What do we have now?
So we have a couple different options right now that our staff is a little splintered in what they do. So Anytime Fitness is a local outfit that offers our employees a government rate that they can use that facility 24 hours a day. I've also been in talks with the superintendent of San Benito High School, Sean Tenenbaum, to roll our staff into being able to use high school facilities when they want to include the weight room, which is an incredible weight room if you've ever seen it. But what we have right now in our office in the back warehouse is that the Deputy Sheriff's Association have allocated their own money, and some of our deputy sheriffs have taken their own personal equipment from their homes, and they've moved it down into a pretty significant kind of CrossFit looking thing that we have back there. But it's all been donated by the deputies themselves. And so what we're trying to do is augment that with some more modern equipment and maintenance on the equipment. And so, for instance, they don't have a rack of dumbbells, which they really need. And a rack of dumbbells is about $1,000. So it's little things like that there's this need for them to increase the footprint of what their workout space is, and then be able to get them all working out together. So we put in this number. We did kind of a thing about what they're looking for, maybe a modern treadmill, some dumbbells, and to augment and do some maintenance on the stuff that they brought in on their own. So there's a pretty significant thing back there, and it's being used. It's really cool to see that our deputy sheriffs are coming in on their own time, and they're staying late after their shifts to work out together. And that's never happened before. And to be honest with you, we talk about some one-time projects. Our modern locker room, for the first time ever in the sheriff's office, them even having access to showers is a big deal, because it makes them able to come in before work out, get themselves cleaned up and ready to look sharp when they're on the street. So it's extremely important for us to be able to do.
And that might be another area I'll just suggest for ARPA consideration. I don't necessarily know how the Samuel High School things, it seems like a bit of an odd dynamic. If they're offering it, that's great to at least explore it. But grown men and women working out with the students I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, it'd be outside of school hours, but I mean, this is the thing that I had started these inquiries before we had any equipment down at the office. So they had no showers, no workout equipment, nothing. We looked to Trindell to maybe fund gym memberships for the staff. That didn't come to fruition. We looked at Trindell to buy some equipment, thinking that it's going to reduce workman's comp claims if our staff is healthy and in shape. That didn't happen. So I was just trying to be creative and figure out some outlet for our staff to be able to keep themselves in shape without doing ultimately what ended up happening is they spent their own money to do it.
Yeah, and I think just for the future, the way the economy has gone with having difficulty holding on to people, the great resignation that we're facing, these little areas are going to potentially make a big difference in being able to recruit and retain employees down the road. And so I would just say we should have these sorts of things on the radar for perhaps even larger commitments as far as expenditures when it comes to fitness. Perhaps we should be looking at offering gym memberships to all of our employees, frankly, as something that we might want to consider at some point. So anyhow, I appreciate hearing that. But just to clarify, you said there's only one vacancy in operations? Because I came into this meeting thinking there were 8 in operations, and so now there's 4 in corrections and 1 essentially in operations as well.
Actually, if I'm wrong, Kelly, we may have 0 now, because I was with the 5. Are we? And corrections has 7 in background right now, and at least 4 of those are offset by. I went and as tactfully as I could, told the CCP, the Community Corrections Partnership, and the AB 109 money that it was appropriate to use that money to staff the jail. That's part of what the impact that this county has, is that we have a larger jail facility, and I think that those funds were appropriately staff our jail, and so it took a little bit time to get there, but I got what I asked for, which is 4 positions from the Community Corrections Partnership to offset that 7. So three of the 7 are general fund expense, and the other 4 should be Community Corrections Partnership.
And real quick, lastly, I know we certainly don't tell you how to, you're an elected official, you run your department, you know how I feel about traffic enforcement. Just wondering, it's not necessarily going to affect the decision, but just wondering where that falls into the sort of the future plans as you get more resources and maybe the ability to put more toward that. I'm just kind of wondering where you stand on that, as I guess now as we speak.
So we do have a expectation of our deputy sheriffs to do traffic enforcement as part of their patrol duties. It sounds like an excuse so often, but with 2 to 3 people on the street handling calls for service, they're not always able to be there. I just got a text from Lieutenant Corral that we actually are getting for the first time our own intoxilizer. It's called an e-PAS machine for DUI enforcement. Typically, sheriff's office don't do that. I disagree with that mindset, and I expect our staff to go out there and enforce all the laws on the roads and in the community. So we are making that step. We also have the Highway Patrol is going to partner with us to help us with our traffic accident investigation if and when we need to do that, which the city of San Juan Bautista is one of the areas that we do that. It's our responsibility because Highway Patrol won't do that. So we're going to increase our training and our ability to do that. And then I just have a fantastic relationship with Captain Cooper, the new area commander from Hollister-Gilroy. And he's in the same boat that we are, but I believe they have 5 officers in training right now. So that's going to greatly impact our ability to partner with them to do traffic enforcement in the county as well.
Okay, yeah, and whether it's the police department or the sheriff's office, this is just, and I know it's just a resources thing. The sheriff's office for years was very bare bones, you working your way back up, but people drive crazy in this town, and it's.
Supervisor, can we get to the? I think we've exhausted this conversation just because at the end of the day, operations is basically the main point of the conversation.
I want to make sure I'm comfortable with this vote.
Yeah, well, so. That's a trust question.
No,
right?
it's not.
So operations has to do with are we going to support these positions or not?
No, well, I'll back up.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, I came into this, and I'm just going to be very upfront, with the expectation there were more vacancies. I came in thinking, and as I said earlier, we're heading into a recession. I had a very hard time, going forward. If there were 8 vacancies, now you're saying there aren't. That was going to be a problem for me. I support the sheriff's office, but I also think I'm very, very concerned about the economy. So I'm trying to get a better handle on, what the expectation is for these new positions. That's all I'm saying. So I would personally like to see more traffic enforcement with our resources that we're funding.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So what is the will of the board? Are we gonna? Can I get a motion on 145?
I'll make a motion that we move forward with
Temporary due pass.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
temporary due pass motion on. item
temporary due
145.
pass motion on item 145, sheriff operations.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And Sheriff Taylor, I just want to say thank you for thinking outside of the box and getting your staff fully up to par. So thank you.
Thank you.
100%.
And then just want to add one thing that I was going to butt in on the disaster recovery thing. More of just it's not an action item, just to let you know. I just got back from the sheriff's conference, and we put a lot of pressure on the Attorney General's office to create what's called an E-fund for law enforcement. So it's been a very big concern of mine that if we do have a wildfire in this community, or if we have a natural disaster in this community, and we have to bring resources in from the outside, that was going to come out of the general fund. There was no other option for that. Yes, we could appeal to FEMA. We saw what happened with that in Lover's Lane and trying to get the levees repaired. But now, in the May revise of the governor's budget, from the pressure of our association, they are going to create, it's not a done deal yet, but it looks like they're going to create what's called a law enforcement E-fund. So if we do have a natural disaster or any type of wildfire or any type of disaster in this community, it'll be covered by the state of California and not by our general fund. So I just
Thank you for that clarification, Sheriff. Okay. Item number 146, RMA planning.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Number 146, Budget Unit 1271, our Economic Development Division. This division it actually started in fiscal year 2021. It's a combination of our contracts / MOUs that we have with our Economic Development Corporation and with our San Benito County Chamber, as well as other partnerships, organizations that we are members with. Essentially, this budget is bare bones as well. Essentially, our MOU with the Economic Development has been $100,000 paid quarterly. 100,000 annually with quarterly payments, 25,000 a quarter. Our MOU with the chamber, San Benito County Chamber, is about 37,000, and then between the 37, the 100,000, and a couple of other organizations that we're part of. For example, the Monterey Bay Economic Development. And a couple other local organizations that makes up the entirety of this division. So with that, I'll hand it back to the board.
Okay, can we go to the public, Madam Clerk?
Via Zoom, if you'd like to provide a comment, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. You've been unmuted. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Elia Salinas, I'm probably not going to last 3 minutes. My battery's about to die. I just want to say that I support both the Economic Development and the San Benito County Business Chamber, and I hope that you continue to fund them. Thank you.
Bringing it back to the board. Does anybody wish to comment?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be opposing this item, specifically the chamber subsidy. Again, I've been talking about we really have to pump the brakes and look at what we're doing financially. I'm very, very concerned that we're going to be back here within months talking about potentially cutting employees. And, that's a half a position right there. The EDC is a full position, basically. And so I know we have a presentation tomorrow from the chamber, so maybe the timing wasn't, exactly perfect for this. But I haven't seen any direct impact from that subsidy. And I've said it again and again, it's not the county's government's responsibility to subsidize the Chamber of Commerce indefinitely, particularly when we have other pressing priorities and we're looking at employees, whether we're going to, add employees or not. And then here we are spending 40 grand on something that's completely non-essential. And if we had something tangible that, that they were doing, maybe I would think differently, but we're essentially just funneling money into their operation as it stands. And they really haven't done, as far as I'm concerned, I appreciate the chamber, but that's a membership driven group. And I just have always philosophically had a problem with local government funneling money toward these groups. And frankly, it's political, and people get elected into these seats and they're, basically divvying out this taxpayer money to their friends in these groups. And so I think it has to stop at some point, and I think it certainly will once when we come into some sort of recession at some point. We're going to have to look at this. And I don't believe I'm going to be in the majority here today, but I will just want to make sure that everybody can look back at this meeting and remember what I said when we're talking about cuts down the road. Thank you.
Supervisor Tiffany?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Again, although I share Supervisor Kuzmicki's concern about potential economy going forward, this is not an area that I think it makes sense for us to cut. It's relatively a small amount of money. The county does not have an economic development person within the county. So because of that, we rely on particularly the EDC to help us in that area. I mean, just one example is Supervisor Hernandez and I attended a retreat, but there's a strategic economic plan that has to be put together every 5 years. It's called SEDS, and EDC is without any, excuse me, additional expense to the county. They're getting that done. That allows us to get granting from the EDA. And that's just one example, but they also work behind the scenes with trying to bring in outside businesses to the community. And as we know, economic development, commercial development is absolutely critical for us if we're ever going to get on top of things and get in more revenue. And so this is one of the last places I would look to cut. And so anyway, I just think it's a necessary expense for the county, and relatively speaking, it's very cost effective relative to us going out and having our own department in this area. Thank you.
Just to clarify, I do support the EDC. If there was a way of breaking them out, I think giving the EDC more time to accomplish what we set out with that, I think, I've never said that I was against the EDC.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
for me, the chamber, I don't see anything out of that directly, that's all.
Okay,
Sorry. for
thank you.
interrupting. Thank you.
No problem. Supervisor Gonzalez?
I just kind of take issue at the comment about giving money to favorites. I mean, I have no favorites. I favored the county developing economic development in any form. And so I would have to support funding this, definitely. And I agree with what Supervisor Tiffany had said, that, you know, it's worthwhile. And we have to look at all of the possibilities. We may be in a position where financially we won't be able to do much, and at least we have funding there and actually someone to be able to help us. So I have to just keep it in the budget as is.
I do support Supervisor Kazubiki's sentiment. I would like to see more metrics on the outcomes. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, right? Because you're seeing that benefit. But just the same, I also agree that, you know, when it comes to these agencies, they have specific tasks. The SEDS is a big element, and yes, the EDA funding is critical. It's a long process. That's part of my frustration, because ultimately I know that these things don't happen overnight. But just the same, also as far as the chamber goes, I've had a pretty good relationship with them, and they've always done really good things. And I was firsthand experiencing what happened after, you know, the shutdowns, and ultimately the need for a pivot to happen, and the chamber stepped in, and they did a lot of things out of their own funding that they went after. So those relationships are really important. Funding is not specific to a relationship, it's actually specific to outcomes. I know that they do things when it comes to, you know, part of that expectation is they are doing things, which they did, and I'll just give one example, is a website that they built where they didn't ask members to participate. They just automatically opted them in, because to go for restaurants was starting to be a hard transition for some businesses that didn't have that capacity, and they didn't have that bandwidth. They worked a lot. They worked very offline, right? So long and short is the chamber brought them online, worked with them, and ultimately benefited those businesses. So it's just I would say it's just a strong position for the county to have those relationships where we're funding organizations that are actually doing the heavy lifting, that does have a benefit to our county. And so that's why I support this item.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Supervisor.
I agree with the sentiments of Supervisor Tiffany, yourself, and Supervisor Gonzalez. So I would have to support it as well. I do understand where you're coming from, Supervisor Kosmicki, and I think, you know, as said, there's apparently a presentation tomorrow. So it would be nice just to have a report maybe before our next budget meeting next year, to show all of some of the different things, so that everyone is aware of the total impact that these organizations have. Those are my comments.
With that said, can I get approval for a motion of temporary due pass for this item?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
Item passes 4-1 with Supervisor Kosmicki dissenting. So on to item 147, building and grounds maintenance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So, item 147, Budget Unit 1290, Building and Ground Maintenance. The main reason that we're bringing this up to highlight is that we are asking the board, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that we put an item on regular is when there is either an error, an omission, or an adjustment requested. So in this case, we neglected to add on the service contract for the HVAC system for the new jail to the cost of $50,374. So this is for a contract for services. And what we're requesting is for the board to approve a supplemental budget amendment for essentially budget unit 1290, item 147. Increasing the cost, increasing the cost in the particular budget line item for the service contract for the HVAC system, and essentially what the printout, or I guess this graph shows, is what was budgeted in one column, the adjustment, and then the revised budget, which would be what the board will be ultimately approving with the temporary due pass here. And with that, I'll turn it back to the board.
Before going to the board, can we get public comment, Madam Clerk?
On Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Bringing it back to the board. What is the will of the board? If I could get a motion, please. Temporary due pass for item number 147.
I'll move to approve as recommended.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Item 148, Public Works Administration Engineering. Gabe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 148, Budget Unit 1295, Public Works Administration of Engineering. The main reason we're bringing this up, similar to the prior item for our Sheriff's Office, highlighting that there's going to be a new personnel added to this budget unit, the Capital Projects Manager being added on. And making sure, and then as well, one other item that we're kind of tagging along with this, an unfunded position that we thought that would be good to monitor along the way. That would be a code enforcement officer, unfunded, that we would see how the year progressed, essentially on the code enforcement side. With their current staffing and the need, whether through the Rural Home Enterprise ordinance or with the MECO ordinance, to see how those kind of moved along, and if there was a need and we had the means, we could bring back an item to the board at a later date to turn on the funding for that position. It's one of those things where we didn't want to add on a position, leave it funded, and essentially we're back on the vacancy budgeting train. So what we decided to do is, we recognize that there is a need there, but we didn't want to commit the funding yet. We wanted to see how things played out and then potentially come back. So the main thing, as I mentioned, this one is just the Capital Projects Manager being added, and that's essentially what we're doing. And then the other piece tied in a little bit with this, I had mentioned it earlier, the additional information, our Public Works Department, RMA, and our Planning Division were working on some internal reorganizations, and the board will probably see a couple of items come through to deal with those. And then this budget that we're approving has provided, and we have added in that flexibility, so when those items are ready and we're ready to roll them out, we can bring them to the board and have it move forward at that time. So with that, I'll turn it back to the board.
Okay, thanks, Gabe. So before we go to the board, can we please go to public comment, Madam Clerk?
Via Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Bringing it back to the board, so any comment?
So just a question, the Capital Projects Manager, is that, that position will oversee primarily roads or also facilities? I know we already have someone that oversees facilities, so I'm just, how does that position play into?
I'll probably defer that question to Steve.
I know we have a lot of road work here we're hoping to get to.
Yeah, that was,
so-
and that was
They're
something
gonna
that the
split up
board
the
gave
work.
direction on
Right,
at our
right, we
last
talked
meeting.
about, anyway, just clarification.
Yeah, Supervisor Tiffany, it is overseeing the facilities, and I think, Gabe, the term should be capital program manager, because we currently have a project manager. So it's to work in that same program, Supervisor Tiffany. So
Is this separate from, there was a discussion about someone that would, or a firm that would help with the road, overseeing the road projects as well?
this is separate. This is purely for all the capital projects, the 20-ish plus facilities, maintenance items, non-roads, non-bridges. This is the
Okay.
other programs.
And
That,
so,
that was what just came up, actually, I believe.
yeah, and then, so begs the question for the roads and all the road work we're doing, is that a separate position, or is that within each project there's the management?
So for the additional road projects for this upcoming year, we're going to use one of our 5 on-call consultants, and we're going to ask them to essentially tell us, provide pricing essentially on help us to manage those additional projects that the board is allowing to move forward, the 12 million extra projects. So, but we already have an on-call list for that service.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So just to go off of what Supervisor Tiffany was saying, Karen Gumman is currently project manager. She spoke at the last session. What would happen if we didn't hire the program manager? Would we get a backlog? I'm trying to get a grasp of what the impact would be, yes versus no, on that position.
It would be a backlog, Supervisor. She's having her hands full just with the projects that she's managing currently, and then we're adding another half dozen plus projects this year. And as grants are actually funded to different departments, those become new projects during the year. So she also helps manage all the grant projects that the different departments, they receive a grant. They manage the accounting for those projects, but she actually manages the project management construction part of those projects.
So there would be projects that would just not happen for.
Correct. Correct. We'd have to prioritize which projects she can manage during the year. But currently she's pretty much got a full plate. So.
And then with some years we have more or less capital projects, so that's where I'm kind of, what if we get into a year, are we expecting to have a year where we don't have as much at some point here? Because we have a lot right now, and that's the thing. I don't necessarily think we can't sustain what we're doing in the next year forever. So that's where I get concerned that it's, we may have much fewer projects in 2 years, and then we have 2 employees overseeing, and then maybe they don't have enough work.
Yeah, I think you're right. The crystal ball is difficult, but the state and the federal government are increasing their grant programs, which I think in the near future, next few years, it looks like there's a lot of grants out there. We actually have a new grant writing consultant on board. So I think for the next few years, just based on grants alone, those 2 positions could be more than busy.
Okay, all right. That's adequate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hearing nothing else, unless Supervisor Dirks.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve temporary due pass for item 148?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 5-0. So item 149, road crew maintenance shop. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So number 149, our road crew maintenance shop. This one is also another supplemental adjustment. 2 parts of it. Essentially what we're adjusting is an increase to the training budget, $20,000. We wanted to provide some extra funding required for some of the road crew staff to be able to obtain a Class A license. And then the second one, there was some funding that was unused. So this is out of the road fund. Some funding that was unused, 140,000 or so for a patch truck that was not purchased in fiscal year 21-22. And what the road fund and the RMA department is asking is to move that funding forward from last year to this year for them to move forward with either the purchase of a patch truck or a system to work with the current patch trucks. So this will be 2 supplemental budget adjustments for the road fund crew division. 140 for a patch for moving forward through the fixed assets through a patch truck, and 20,000 for their training. With that, I'll turn it back to the board.
Okay, if we can go to the public, Madam Clerk.
Via Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. You've been unmuted. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Elias Salinas. So with regards to the Class A license, is that part of the job description when they are hired, they should have the Class A requirement? Or is the department now asking that those employees get their Class A license? And if it's part of the job description, is that why you're asking for the funding, so that they can go and retake their test? Thank you.
No further comments.
Bringing it back to the board. Can I get it? Sir, if there's no questions, can I have a motion to temporary do pass item number 149?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll just make a comment
Sure.
since the question was asked. I do know that Class A license is critical for the operation of the department. In the past, they've had a very hard time recruiting, much less find someone that can come in with a Class A license. So I think this is a situation where the superintendent, Jason DeRosa, can get the training done of existing members to get a Class A license, which will then move them along and also make them more productive out on the roads. Anyway,
Agreed.
my comment.
Yeah, I used to have a Class A, and I've heard it's a lot harder today than it was before. So hearing no other comment, can I get a motion? Temporary do pass to approve item number 149.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, these 2 next ones are together, item 150 and 151, CSA 50 and CSA 53. Gabe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these were both omissions that were brought to my attention after the recommended budget was posted. So CSA number 50, Dunville, they had actually last year gone to a 218 vote process to add an additional $640 per parcel to their assessment fees. And this wasn't accounted for in the upcoming budget. So with this item, we're asking for a supplemental adjustment. As you can see, the breakdown on the left-hand side, CSA 50, an increase to what would be their budget of $19,000 to cover and to take into account that $640,000. The second item, number 151, excuse me, CSA 53, the Riverview Estates, they had an annexation of Riverview 2 for the self-help projects, 24 parcels at 407.56 cents per parcel, which was added on. And that dollar amount, we also needed to account for it on the benefit assessment side, an additional $9,781. And what this item again is for approving supplemental budget amendments for these 2 CSA, CSA 50 and CSA 53. With that, I'll turn it back.
Okay, if we can go to public comment, Madam Clerk, please.
Via Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Bringing it back to the board, can I get a motion? What is the will of the board? Motion to temporary do pass item numbers 150 and 151.
And all the, Mr. Chair, all the funding's coming out of their account, nothing's, yeah.
Yeah, everything's coming out of them. essentially CSA number 50, the additional fee would put them pretty much about flush. And then CSA 53, they were already, had a healthy, expenses being less than their revenue, so they had more revenues, and they're actually going to be added on a little bit more. So similar to how we were discussing earlier with CSA 48, if there was a need for them to maybe want more services for one reason or another, they had a healthy fund balance to talk to the CSA coordinator if they wanted to do something.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So can I?
Real quickly, sorry,
Yep.
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Dirks. I just want it to be noted, with this CSA 50 in particular, it's in my district and I'm very familiar with it. They have a lot of special things going on there, with their own water treatment and everything that they have. That I do know they haven't had a chance to look at the itemized budget themselves. I just want it noted that hasn't happened yet. I'm not opposed to this, considering that it's just making sure that the additional revenue is reflected in that budget, but I just needed to make that statement. Thank you.
Okay. Once again, can we get a motion, temporary due pass, item 150 and 151?
Move to approve as recommended.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0. Item now 152, capital projects. Gabe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 152, Budget Unit 3500, Capital Projects. This one is an administrative omission in the capital project schedule, and the board and the public will see in the agenda there is an additional subsequent revised exhibit, I believe C, for the capital project list, where the project was omitted from the list. The financial piece was already taken into consideration, and this is for the OES new HVAC unit, which is failing mechanically here in the building next door. The funding was already budgeted. The problem was it just wasn't included on the list, and administratively we wanted to make sure that that was addressed. So what we're requesting is to make sure that the board approves the modification with that subsequent revised capital project list, including the new OES HVAC unit in the budget, which the funding had already been approved. The total amount on that project was about $11,500, not significant. One of the reasons why it was omitted was we thought the work was actually going to get done in fiscal year 21-22. Everything was ordered, but there will be some work that gets done in the upcoming year. So that's one of the reasons. And with that, I'll turn it back.
Okay. Can we go to public comment, Madam Clerk?
Via Zoom, please press *9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Bringing it back to the board. What is the will of the board? Any questions, concerns? Nope. Supervisor Tiffany?
No, I was going to make a motion.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve item number 152, temporary due pass, capital projects?
Also move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, these are all going to be lumped together. These are the Developer Projects Fund 639, items 153 through 162.
Thank
Gabe?
you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. These final items are more informational. Numbers item 153 to 162. This is a new developer project fund that between administration, the auditor's office, and RMA, we felt that it was time to separate expenses for transparency to make sure that we were able to track everything better. So that's why, for example, in the the subsequent or the fiscal years before the current recommended budget, everything is blank, and essentially the reason behind this is to be able to better track different projects happening in the county, whether they move forward or not. At least what this will provide is a sense of transparency towards all these projects, and we're able to keep the accounting separate from the county. Bottom line is anything within this developer project fund is essentially covered by the developer themselves. Getting their application in through the system, having it work through the planning department. Those individual projects will ultimately have to follow the appropriate parameters, so come to the board for their approval. But this is just on the funding side to make sure that we're tracking everything correctly and separately. So this way it works both well for both our side and for the developer. We're able to keep the expenses separate and be able to move forward appropriately. And essentially, like I mentioned, this is more of an informational item that we wanted to make the board and the public aware. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay, before going to the board, if we can go to public comment.
Via
Madam Clerk.
Zoom, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Okay.
I had one comment. Looking at the grid that you put up there and all the various projects, you have 2,055,100 in terms of each project. Is that what the fee each one is going to be paying to the county, or are those just numbers in there for safekeeping?
So that the number there is overall. If let me go to.
Because when I went to each one of the projects individually, I see that same figure in there.
So if I go to the agenda and let's say we look at the Fairview Four Corners. So the top one is the overall budget piece. So as Supervisor Gonzalez mentioned.
Can you share that on your screen? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm looking at my screen, yeah.
So looking at the developer project fund 639, this top one is the overall recommended one, so the 2,055,000. And then what we have is essentially a budget unit breakdown having all the different projects. And then we have individual breakdown per budget unit. So Fairview Corners, the amount on Fairview Corners, 79,000.
Okay, maybe I didn't go down far enough then, because each time I went on one of those aligned items, it gave me that same figure.
So to
Okay, I
answer
see. Thank you.
answer your
I didn't scroll
question,
down far enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all
Okay, because
broken
that was
down.
kind of deceiving there, but I see. It's there. Thank you.
Okay, what's the will of the board on items 152 through 160, 153 through 162, temporary due pass?
I move to approve.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And I was just, Mr. Chair, I was just going to comment, I think this is a really good idea to separate this.
Yes.
For transparency purposes. All this comes out of the developers themselves, as you said, and it's just, it's good not to have this all lumped in.
Yeah.
Agreed.
For the public's point of view. Thank you.
100% agreed. Thank you, Gabe. So now on to item 163, County Integrated Waste Management Fund 225.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 163, Budget Unit 3883, County Integrated Waste Management Fund. This was a new fund, Fund Number 225, Budget Unit 3883, created to separate specific expenses between San Benito and the Integrated Waste, the regional agency. And similar to the prior items, what we wanted to do was separate the costs, I guess the funding, both on the expenses and on the revenue side, of what is a county responsibility different than what is the JPA responsibility. Some of the funding comes in and is, or I guess some of the expenses come in and they pertain strictly to county integrated waste. Some of the expenses strictly pertain to all the different the other organizations, cities within the JPA. And what we wanted to do with this is separate out just the county. Similar to before with the other, with the developer project fund, provide a sense of transparency with everything and all the expenses that we're showing. So that's why on this one, just like the prior one, there's no history to this. And what this will allow us to do is be able to better track on the accounting side what we have. So just wanted to highlight that. With that, I'll pass it back.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can we go to the public, please?
If you'd like to make a comment on Zoom, please press star 9 on your phone or the raise your hand icon on your screen. No comments.
Bringing it back to the board. What's the will of the board? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve item 163, Harmag Integrated Waste Management County Fund 225?
Also move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Item 164, Budget Reserve Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was one of the items that we had ultimately culminating from discussions that we've had previously and that we've talked about during the budget meetings. And this item is actually the same item that and I'm gonna kind of preface what's also on the agenda. This item is linked to the agenda, and it's also one of the documents that we had to subsequently add as an attachment, which wasn't connected all the way. So
Yeah,
we wanted to make sure that was highlighted, the policy itself. Through the meetings that we've had, what we had discussed was setting up a operating reserve of 15% of the budget and an emergency reserve of 5%. Now, through the meetings, we had talked about how the feasibility of establishing everything as a get-go first year may be a bit challenging because we have to get more or less our footing in this new kind of environment, establishing the reserve policy. So what we had discussed is doing a build-up approach, essentially phasing this out over the course of 3 years, where the first year we'll establish a 5% operating reserve and a 2.5 emergency reserve. Year 2, we'll move the operating reserve to 10%, emergency reserve to 5%, and then on that final year, we'll move to 15% on operating and then 5% on the emergency reserve. Now, with the approval of the policy, I can't establish the reserve yet. The reserve has to be established with the adopted budget. So with the approval of the policy, what that tells the county administration office and the county auditor's office is that as the fiscal year comes to an end, we know what our essentially balance or unassigned balances at the end of the year. By the time that we put together our schedules for the adopted budget, we can set that number aside. Any changes to the reserve policy would need to be brought to the board, but the only time that it can be established would be during the adoption of the budget. So right now what we're asking for is for the approval of the reserve policy, which is more or less what's laid out here in these charts. And then we will then subsequently come back during the adopted budget with the essentially the establishment of the formal piece. Or I guess quantifying it with numbers. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay, before we go to the board, if we can go to the public, please, Madam Clerk.
Via Zoom, if you'd like to make a comment, please press star 9 or the raise your hand icon. No comment.
Bringing it back to the board. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, we've talked about quite a bit, and I think it's great that we're moving in this direction, particularly given the concern of the economy. So, yeah, I think we're all for this, absolutely.
So just calculating moving forward, so that would be the fiscal year 24, 25, that we would hit the maximum of 15% for the operating and 5% for the emergency?
Yes,
Okay.
the reserve policy also has some language, so not knowing what the potential future situation is like, if things really go down a cliff, then we do have to tap into it. There's some flexibility even within the county budget code where, depending on the emergency, we're able to make, adjustments to the reserve as needed during, time of emergency. So that the policy does provide some flexibility there.
Okay. So bringing it back to the board, can I get a motion to approve temporary due pass, item 164, budget reserve policy?
Move to approve as recommended.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0. Okay, so we're down to the final budget deliberations. Any further deliberations from the board?
No, Mr. Chair, I just want to publicly thank staff and all the work that you've done. I know it goes without saying, this happens every year, but this is a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this. And I think it's a good budget, and I'm just really happy with the work that our staff did. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yes,
I'm
thank you.
not sure if we have to go to
Thank
public
you.
on the final deliberation.
No, not on the final deliberations, just
So, yeah, I agree with Supervisor Kosmicki. This was a heavy lift. I appreciate the sentiment of the board, honestly, the will to do what it can to be as efficient and cost-effective as possible, trying to preserve our resources. We're a small community. So we have items 1 through 7 per staff recommendations. If we can get a motion, temporary due pass to approve those recommendations.
I'll make that motion that we approve items 1 through 7 per staff recommendations.
All those in favor? Or actually, can I get a second? I'm sorry.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0. So, one final, basically, we have our next board meeting coming tomorrow, so I know we're going to see each other tomorrow, so can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Their mom says, "Where you going?"